Notre Dame fans, welcome back to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Tuesday, August 16th, which means we are so much closer to Notre Dame kicking off the 2022 season, which will be in Columbus, Ohio. Got my credential request approved for the Ohio State game, so I will be there. Vince, Sean will be there. It is going to be a fun day, but we are obviously have a lot to still talk about before we get there, Ryan, and we are still breaking down the Notre Dame team today. We're going to talk about a couple things. We're going to talk briefly about the Notre Dame, the report that is out about Notre Dame's potential new TV deal. Won't talk about it too much. I know Sean and Vince are going to go into much greater detail about that tonight as we kind of try to learn more about that. We're going to talk about just sort of expectations for the Notre Dame running backs and receivers and really what those units have to do for this football team to really be the dynamic offense it needs to be. Forget what it's capable of. It needs to be if Notre Dame is going to be a team that contends for a title this year, next year, any other years moving forward. It's one topic, Ryan, however, that I don't plan on talking much about today. And if you all want to ask about it in the mailbag, you can. But I know a lot of people are fired up about Paul Feinbaum's comments. And I honestly, Ryan, don't care. I know who Paul Feinbaum is. He's not a real journalist. He's not a real analyst. He's a provocateur. And he says silly things to get people riled up. And it worked with the Notre Dame fan base, which is exactly why he does it. Beyond saying I really just don't respect his opinion nor care about his opinion. And I don't want to waste any more time than I already have talking about Paul Feinbaum. So I don't intend to say much about Paul Feinbaum and his absurd comments because they're absurd, but he meant them to be absurd for this exact reason. He's playing to his audience, right? SEC guy on ESPN. Guess who they hate? Notre Dame. So he's throwing them raw meat. I'm not going to take the bait beyond just what we've already said already.
Shut them up, man. I mean, that's as
Right.
easy as it goes, right? If Notre Dame goes into the shoe and have I don't even say decisive, but just have a victory over Ohio State, it'll shut some people up. I mean, at the end of the day, I understand why he said the thing he said, and I understand why he is anti-Notre Dame just based upon what his
audience is, right?
Exactly.
Right.
Who he's appealing to is the biggest thing. But the one way to change that narrative is to win football games.
Right. Punch them in the
Notre
teeth.
Dame has a chance.
And they're always going to talk. They're always going to say, well, if they beat Ohio State, Ohio State's not that good anyway.
Sure.
Beat Clemson. Clemson's not that good anyway. They're going to be that way. So, like you said, just keep winning and then ignore them. That's my biggest advice to Notre Dame fans. Stop watching Paul Feinbaum. Stop listening to them. Stop listening to these people that say stupid things. And when that's about, that's about the best advice I can give.
Yeah.
So, Ryan, let's talk a little bit about the latest report from John Hourland, who had a report out today. And again, this is just a report that we've heard. I have not had this confirmed by anyone else. But his report is that Notre Dame and NBC are heating up on a deal that would give Notre Dame $60 million a year, which when you include the current, because right now the ACC is still a conference. Notre Dame still is in contract with the ACC, which means they're going to get north of 10. It's about 10, 11, I think is where the deal is, around there on an annual basis for Notre Dame. So that gets them over $70 million a year. My goal for Notre Dame, and from the people I've talked to, is if they got a minimum of 50, they were going to be in really good shape. And now you're talking about you're going to have about $70 million a year when you include those two deals, if this report does turn out to be true. So we're going to talk briefly about what that means for Notre Dame. We're going to talk briefly about kind of why it matters for Notre Dame. And then also, why is this being leaked out, right? Because the Notre Dame football team has a hard time stopping leaks. There's a lot of people, and this has been that way for a long time at Notre Dame, that like to talk around the football program. This assistant to this person who wants to be a source, so they talk to this person, and you get a lot of that kind of stuff, which I don't mind because it benefits us. The university as a whole does not have a lot of leaks. You don't get stuff out other than things that they want out. So if this is being reported, I highly doubt that this is coming from necessarily NBC. It's most likely, this is just an assumption on my part. I would assume it's coming from Notre Dame, because Notre Dame is doing in my opinion, is doing one of two things. Is number one is they're getting ready to a deal, and it's kind of calm people down a little bit. Or the other two is like, hey, Fox and CBS, hey, ESPN, who just lost the Big Ten. This is the number we're at. This is the number that's on the the table, and we're perfectly comfortable signing it now, unless you want to step up and knock us off our feet. That's where I think this kind of report is coming from, Ryan.
Yeah, it makes total sense. I mean, there has to be a starting number, right? I mean, for there to be a bidding war, quote unquote, like you have to know what the number's at. So I think that's going to generate interest. It's going to generate a price point just in general. I mean, I think the biggest thing with big brands is, I talk about this from a personal brand perspective, and you run a business, so you could speak to this too, is the fact that you have to know what you're worth, right?
Mm-hmm.
So Notre Dame is putting a number on their brand right now, and there's a possibility that someone is going to outbid you, and possibility that multiple outlets are going to potentially outbid. And so you're starting the process there. I think it's a brilliant move, if I'm being honest. I really do. I mean, one, you're not aligning with the Big Ten. We've discussed that in volume at this point. But the biggest thing for me is that Notre Dame understands they're a big brand, and they're starting the jockeying for that brand now.
Right.
And there's a tangible understanding of what the price is going to start at. We're not sitting here and saying it's going to be 71 and 71 is it. Like, it could jump, and there could be a situation where Notre Dame could pretty much, it's not a blank check, but like, they're driving up their price point. They're driving up the interest in their products, which is all about branding, right? So I think it's a really good starting point for Notre Dame, because now you have a general understanding of what the brand is somewhat worth, or at least in the ballpark. And now other entities are going to understand that, and now they're going to come and start the bidding war, in my opinion. I think that's going to start here.
I mean, you can know your worth, right? But your worth at the end of the day is really only what someone's willing to pay to have it, right? I mean, that's what your worth is. And so Notre Dame can do things to build your brand, but at the end of the day, it's how do other people value it? And now that number is on the table, and I don't think it's a coincidence that this came out so quickly after the whole ESPN thing, because ESPN is now a suitor. And, if you can get ESPN, even if because the way it works in business, right, is you may know where you want to go, but you want to drive the price up. So what do? You get it. If you follow, professional sports, you see this all the time. Go get another team interested in you that's willing to offer you more than what your current team is, in an attempt to get the price driven up by the current team or the other team out there that you want to sign with. And that's, to me, if Jack Swarbrick and the people in Notre Dame are the business people I think that they are, that's what makes me again, this is 100% our opinion, right? We are not the only thing that's out there to report is what John Hourland said about $60 million for NBC. There's nothing else beyond, why they're going to sign this many games, play Big Ten. There's nothing official in there about that, or the length of the contract, nothing like that. So everything that follows is just kind of our opinion and read on the situation. Just want to make sure that that's clear to people.
Sure.
But for me, if they're the business people, I think, Ryan, this is a smart move to do. Just like when they sort of let out the $75 million is kind of what they're asking for, right? So they offer that, then it's like Notre Dame kind of leaks out, hey, this is where we kind of think this is going to go. Then you hear, oh, this is what the deal is going to be with the Big Ten. Okay, so you now know what the asking price is that's going to make Notre Dame happy. You now know what NBC has on the table. I said Big Ten, I meant NBC. All right, CBS. All right, Fox. All right, ESPN. Now you know what the number is. And I'm very curious to see kind of what they do. In the interesting thing, because the Big Ten signed their deal with the 3 networks, right? And then there's also rumblings of potential Apple or Amazon streaming networks being part of that as well. So you got all these, 16 teams now starting in a couple of years, right? It'll be 16, Ryan, once the 2 Pac-12 teams join. So you've got all these, during conference play, you're going to have at least 6-7 games a week, because there's going to be teams on buys, and other weeks you're going to have 8 games during in-season play, and then of course even more during the non-conference part of the season, where you could have sometimes 15, 16 games that have to be hosted. It's a lot of different networks you need to get it on. And so obviously there would be some on the Big Ten network already. And so the deal is like, from my understanding is, I think the Fox Big Ten game will be at noon. The CBS Big Ten game will be at 3:30. And then NBC will have a primetime Big Ten game. Right. So all those networks have slots to fill at the other times. Right. So Fox still needs a 3:30 and primetime slot. CBS still needs a noon and primetime slot. Right. So that's kind of where it goes. So ESPN and now Fox are going to have that sweet spot that Notre Dame wants to be in for that 3:30 game, still having that open. And the interesting thing with Fox is now Fox still has their primetime slot open too, and Notre Dame likes to have 1 or 2 primetime games a year. And that's the interesting thing with the NBC contract is what are they going to do the weeks that Notre Dame wants to have a night game? And that was part of the previous NBC deal is for X number of night games a year. And so what is going to happen there? Are their night games going to be on Peacock? Is the deal with the Big Ten where there's going to be a couple weeks where they don't have a Big Ten game? That's going to get real interesting, which I think could open up some opportunities for some of the other networks jump in and say, hey, we'd like to have you. Not only do we want that, we want to give you more primetime games if you want them. I don't know if that would be attractive to Notre Dame, but it's certainly a selling point. And I think that's what's going to make this whole thing interesting. Like the report came out today about NBC, and it could very well be a done deal for all I know. The answer is we don't know. But just knowing how Notre Dame operates, I really believe this is sort of a floating it out there like, hey, this is the number we've kind of settled on. This is the offer. So if you want us, you're going to need to up your package offer.
Isn't it funny, Brian? As soon as it came out, I saw when you posted your article that kind of highlighted a little bit of the conversation that people started on the Notre Dame's afraid to join the conference thing again. Isn't it so funny, man? It is just genuinely hysterical to see these.
I didn't even see that.
Yeah. Literally on your tweet, I went through it and I looked at.
This is why I rarely look at my mentions.
Yes. I mean, I started doing this when I put something that, is drawing some people talking. I just go and I mute the whole conversation because I don't need to see any of these replies anymore. But it's just so wild, man. People are literally mad at Notre Dame for having a brand. That's literally what it is, man. It is. It just makes me laugh every single time.
There's also a lot of fans who are really ignorant of history. Right. I mean, that's the other fact is I hear this all the time. Like, does Notre Dame think they're better than everybody else? That they're too good to join a conference? And I want to be like, hey, number one, yes, they are. The reality is if Alabama could start their own brand and make $100 million as $150 million or whatever their needs are as an independent, they would. Texas tried that and it didn't work. That's one of the biggest entities in all of sports. They tried to do their own thing and it didn't work.
Right.
So, yeah, if they could. But here's the thing is Notre Dame has never changed. Notre Dame has been this way always, and they tried to join conferences and they were shut out because it's a Catholic school. So, if you want to be mad that Notre Dame's independent, blame yourselves because Notre Dame tried to join the Big Ten twice. And the Big Ten said, no, we don't like Catholics. And so, that's why, Notre Dame's whole playing a national brand is because the Big Ten shut them out. There weren't a whole lot of other options other than playing Iowa Flight School and stuff like that. That's a literal team that Notre Dame played back, I think, under Newt Rockne.
What was the name of it? Say it again.
Iowa Flight School. They played a medical. Oh yeah, it's hilarious. Like some of the if you go back and look at some of the teams that Notre Dame played back then. It was true for everybody. But yeah, some of the opponents are like Western State Normal, Kalamazoo. This is who they played in 1919. Notre Dame, this is under Newt Rockne, right? And this is his second year. They beat Kalamazoo, they beat Mount Union, they beat Nebraska, they beat Western State Normal, they beat Indiana, they beat Army, they beat Michigan Agriculture, they beat Purdue, and they beat Morningside.
Wow.
So yeah, that's kind of, like I said, that's kind of how it is. And so, when you look at the different, that's just kind of how it was. There weren't as many teams as there are now. 1924, the first full championship that Newt Rockne had, they beat Lombard, they beat Wabash. Well, I've coached against Wabash. They beat Army, they beat Princeton, they beat Georgia Tech, Wisconsin, Nebraska, Northwestern, Carnegie Tech, and Stanford. So it just was a different era. And Notre Dame started doing their national thing because of the fact that the Big Ten shut them out. And not all the Big Ten. Michigan State supported Notre Dame, and they tried to get Notre Dame in, but Michigan was the power program back then. And so that's why Notre Dame became what they became. And the last time Notre Dame won a national title, there was more teams in the independent by far than there was in any individual conference, by far. Yeah. We've talked about this, Ryan, where, when you look at 1988, the last time Notre Dame won a national title, I think the 4 of the top 5 teams that year were independent teams. So if you go look at the rankings at the end of the year, Notre Dame was 1, Miami was 2, Florida State was 3, Michigan was 4, West Virginia was 5. The only team in that group that wasn't an independent is Michigan. And everybody else was an independent. I mean, if you look at the rankings, that year, the independent, the independents had the number 1, 2, 3, 5, and 13 ranked teams in the country. Syracuse was 13th. Other teams that were independent: Louisville, South Carolina, Pitt, Rutgers, Penn State, Boston College, Cincinnati, East Carolina, Virginia Tech. So all those teams are independent. Those teams all chose to leave being independent and go join a conference. They made that choice. Notre Dame chose to stay where they were. So it's not like Notre Dame was in the Big Ten and chose to go out on their own. And that's what just so many fans just don't understand. And that, or they just don't care because they just don't know how to make rational arguments. And that's what you find with a lot of it.
It's blind hatred a lot. I mean, I know we talk about this all the time, but it's just at this point now that there is so few independents and Notre Dame is the only prominent independent left. It's a little bit of why are they different type of thing, right? Like, I mean, it's really hating on a brand, if anything. Like, it's just, Notre Dame is a different entity. They're different than us. We hate them for whatever reason. Like, that's just, that is what it is, in my opinion. Because
you know what it is, Ryan? I always say this, they hate us because they ain't us. That's really what it comes down to, right? And so I just don't pay a lot of attention to that. So I didn't even notice that there were those responses because they're just so dumb.
Yeah.
But I think this is good for Notre Dame. If this is in fact the range that we're talking about, even if this is the actual number they get combined with the 10 million of the ACC, even if the ACC goes away, then Notre Dame will just sign a deal with the Big Ten to be that partner. I mean, that's what I think that they'll do. And so this is great for Notre Dame because I've tried to explain to somebody before, it's like, well, if the Big Ten gets 100 million, then that's a huge deficit. I'm like, no, it's not. You don't understand. They're working on different operating budgets. Notre Dame has 10,000 students. Ohio State has like 50, right? I think Ohio State's a huge school. That means more faculty, more staff, more buildings, all these different things. And Notre Dame doesn't work as often as it can. COVID has kind of jacked it up a little bit the last couple of years, but Notre Dame does actually works within a budget. So they've been working within a budget of $20 million, where other schools are kind of spending outside their means, which is why they had so many issues during COVID because they weren't getting the same TV revenue. Well, during that first year of COVID, Notre Dame got actually more TV revenue because they joined the ACC for that year. So the ACC had more revenue that year because of Notre Dame joining. So it's just one of those things where, people it's always been, people get angry at things they don't understand, right? Or that they're not comfortable with. And they don't understand why Notre Dame is independent. They don't understand the history of independent football. And so, they think it's somehow Notre Dame saying we're better than you, when in reality is they kind of are, but that's okay, right? I mean, you would do it if you could, right? And don't get mad at me because you can't. I think that's kind of the mantra that Notre Dame has. And I like the fact that Notre Dame hasn't allowed themselves to be bullied into joining a conference. And this is what we said from day one. Notre Dame is not going to be bullied into joining a conference, right? And that just continues to remain true.
100%. Yeah, I think if anything, we're going to see now that, the conferences have always wanted this, but the conferences want Notre Dame to be a part of it because, like you just said, with the ACC schedule that year, it makes them more valuable.
Right.
Their individual brand pumps up the larger brands, right? So that is what we're working towards here. And again, to your point, and I think I said it earlier, I think this is a great starting point. It is, because now there's a number to the deal, and now that's where the jockeying's starting, right? Like, you need that number to start the bidding war, and the number's out there now. Who knows if it'll end up being NBC? Who knows what it will end up looking like? All I know is that we had the initial conversation and the initial starting points, and it is out there now. So I don't think this could be looked at as a negative. It's not like they signed a deal hastily and they're not doing their research. It's literally a starting point for Notre Dame.
Sure. If Notre Dame felt panicked, they would sign this deal before it could leak out. I mean, it would be like pen to paper. Oh yeah, you're going to offer me what? Let me sign that before you change your mind. That's not where they are. Right. The other thing too is this is really in a lot of ways great timing for Notre Dame, because the TV deal runs through the 2024 season, and then the apparel contract runs through 2023. And so in back-to-back years, Notre Dame is going to sign 2 huge deals that are going to give it a huge windfall. I mean, just a huge boost in revenue. I mean, Notre Dame's apparel deal with Under Armour a decade ago was like $90 million. At the time, that was big. there are $150 to $200 million deals being signed now. The fact, and I'm pretty confident in saying this, Nike and Air Jordan, same company but the different brands, are both trying to make deals with Notre Dame. I've been told that Adidas is trying to get involved. That there's a lot of different apparel companies that are trying to get in with Notre Dame, because right now Notre Dame is a hot program. Right. And when Notre Dame is good and their brand is selling, then people want to be a part of it. So the timing of all this is great for Notre Dame. And if they can go out and be successful on the field this season, it's going to make them even more appealing to these different areas.
Right. And one big thing that I think you just mentioned as well is that the fact that the number's out there is because Notre Dame wants it to be out there,
exactly.
Right? Like that's usually what happens when things get leaked. It's usually because somebody wants the
because there's no benefit for NBC having this out there. There's no fun. I mean, unless the people in NBC are just stupid, and I don't think that they are.
Right. Why would they show their hands of like,
right.
This is what we're
Why would you let
to?
Fox and ESPN and CBS and ESPN know, like, hey guys, this is what we have on the table. I dare you to match us. Right. That'd be terrible business. And maybe they are that bad business people. I just don't think that they are. I think this is coming from Notre Dame.
Yeah. Because I mean, honestly, Brian, like even let's compare this slightly to like a guy that's trying to find a job, right? It's like if you have a couple different jobs that want to hire you potentially, usually you'll go, you'll get that offer and then you'll go to the other one and then they'll be like, we'd love to have you. But then you're like, okay, I understand, but I got offered this, and then they'll either match it or they'll do better, right? Like that's how this works. That's the jockeying for the price tag. So yeah, I think that this number is clearly out there. Notre Dame wants to be out there because, again, to your point, what does NBC get out of this being out there? Like it's showing their hands. That business doesn't want to show their hand if they're the ones that are trying to sign the deal. Like that doesn't help them in any capacity.
Right. DM ND13 did say, will the increase in revenue trickle down to paying coaches more? Seems like it hasn't been much of an issue in the last couple of years, but I know it has been in the past. Just for the record, I have always contended this to be true, and I believe this to be true. Notre Dame not paying coaches was never about them not having the money to pay coaches. It was their choice. They chose not to pay coaches. And that was one of the weird things that they've done in the past. So look, if Notre Dame, let's say the revenue pool for Notre Dame's coaches per year for the football team, for example, is, let's say Marcus Freeman's making $5 million and the 10 assistant coaches are making on average $1 million, just throwing that out there. Right. That's $15 million a year. Right. If they needed to up that to 2025, it would simply just go raise the money, because a lot of the positions right now are endowed. So the school doesn't have to pay as much. And so that's been a choice, not necessarily a lack of funds. Let's just put it that way, right? Notre Dame hasn't had a lack of funds. They've made that choice. And I think now they realize they do have to be more competitive when it comes to paying coaches, which is why they were willing to ante up to get Marcus Freeman as the defensive coordinator, right? Yep. Because they understand they Harry Hiestand isn't making minimum wage from a coaching standpoint, right? I mean, that's, keeping out Washington, who several SEC schools were pursuing, out of the SEC did not cost you, minimum wage for coaches. There was a pretty penny there. Keeping Tommy Rees turned down a huge deal from LSU. Now, part of that, number one, is he wanted to stay at Notre Dame, right? But he didn't do that for a couple $100,000 a year, right? I mean, can we, so Notre Dame has certainly upped it, and it's not, and that's during a time when they actually have been in a bit of a budget tightening because of what went on with COVID, and that's the reality. So it's always there, but a lot of that came from the people in the development office who work their tails off to go out and have the wealthy donors that want to support the program. Hey, here's how you can support the program. We need $2 million to endow the defensive coordinator job. Is my name going to be on it? Is my name going to be on his panel? Yes, sir, it will be. Okay, cool. Done. I mean, that's just kind of how it is. Now, it's a little bit more complex than that. I don't want to disrespect the development people. Like, that's all that they do. It's that simple. Make a phone call and you just raise $2 million. But it's there to be had, and that's the reality of it. And that's why it's never been the issue that people make it out to be.
Sure.
So, Ryan, let's transition into the main topic for today, because speaking of winning football games, that's what Notre Dame's goal is going to be this year. Mm-hmm. Notre Dame is going to have to get better on offense, right? I mean, Notre Dame is a 10-2 team this year if their offense just keeps being what it's been. And I think at the minimum that should be the case, because, you look at the 4 best teams in the schedule. we've talked about this. It's either it's Ohio State and Clemson, and then some combination, depending on who you're talking to, of USC, BYU, North Carolina, and Boston College, right? Some combination of them. The reality is, if you take that 6 games right there, I think at worst Notre Dame's 4-2, against those teams, and kind of beat everybody else you're supposed to beat. They're a 10-2 team based on how good the defense is going to be. Even if the defense doesn't see a jump, just don't backslide. Sure. And just kind of what the expectations are. You look at the schedule, it's really top heavy, but a lot of beatable teams after that, if we're being honest about the schedule. So to me, it's just one of those things where I look at it and say, this is a 10-2 team if they just kind of keep doing what we're doing, right? But that's not the standard, right? The standard is to take that next step. Okay, the standard is to not be a 10-2 team. It's to be 11-1, be 12-0, get to the playoff, win championship games, right? That's the standard. So in order for that to happen, this unit we're going to discuss today with the running backs and receivers, they got to raise their game. It can't just be what it's been. It's got to be taken to another level. We're going to focus mainly on the running backs and receivers, Ryan, and we'll sprinkle in some conversation about the tight end today, and we'll sprinkle in some conversations about the tight end tomorrow when we talk about the offensive line. But that's the thing, right? And we've said this time and time again this summer. We like Marcus Freeman. I didn't particularly like Brian Kelly, but I didn't hammer Brian Kelly because I didn't like him. I hammered him because he didn't meet the standard of what excellence at Notre Dame is supposed to be about, and that doesn't change for Marcus Freeman, right? And so if they're going to get to that level, the running backs and receivers have got to play well. But right now, Ryan, the concern is there's a lot of talent in the players that are on the roster, but there's a big lack of proven production and injuries. We'll get to those at the end. But at the end of the day, how well this group plays is going to determine whether Notre Dame is a 10-2 team because how good their defense, offensive line is going to be, and we think quarterback be good, or can they go even higher than that? I think this is the unit right here that ultimately holds the key to making that happen.
Well, I mean, because there's not an absence of talent, to your point, right? I mean, we're going to go through a lot of the names today, and it's like, I mean, there's a 4-3 dude in the backfield. There's 4-4 dudes out wide. I mean, multiple guys, and one that was just on the freak list of the wide receiver, a running back that was on the freak list last year. So Notre Dame has talent at the skill position, and that's not even counting Michael Mayer as much in this show today. So there is talent absolutely everywhere. There's no question about that. The biggest concerns, and I know you said we'll get into it, the depth and the proven commodity. Notre Dame doesn't have a ton of proven commodities in their skill positions, but that's not because there isn't talent necessarily. It's just because there's some age things. There's some, Chris Tyree was behind Kyron Williams for a couple of years, who's a really talented player, and he was banged up a little bit. So there has been some circumstances why it is a little bit of an unproven groups right now from the skill position perspective. But I agree with you, Brian. It's the simple fact of we keep talking about Tyler Buckner, and for good reason. Tyler Buckner, I think, is going to be a dynamic weapon. But how can you help Tyler Buckner this year if you've got skill positions around you are able to make plays, right? Like if they're able to catch a 5-yard slant and then bust it for a 30-yard gain, create plays that sometimes aren't there. The talent is there for Notre Dame to do it. It's just a lot more projection right now than a floor. Like we're talking more about the upside because there's so much talent, but it's just tangibly, we've only seen the production in spurts for several of the players. So I think it could be really good, but it's also a volatile group in the fact that we're talking about some younger players in a lot of instances, some unproven players in a lot of instances. Doesn't mean the talent isn't good. It's just until they do it on the field, they are a question mark until we see it.
Potential is an interesting word, and upside and ceilings and all those are really interesting terms, but depending on how the context of the conversation, it can be a really good thing or a really bad thing. And when we're just talking about like the overall evaluation of the talent on the roster, we'll use words like upside, ceiling, potential, and it's a good thing. Hey, there's a lot of talent, a lot of potential on this team. When you're talking about the results of a certain unit, you don't want to be using the words potential and upside and ceiling. You want to be using words like production. It's because when we're talking about potential is used in a context like this, Ryan, of it's not there yet. It's, well, they've got upside, but ... insert reason why they haven't done it yet, right? And that's not where they need to be. And that's the big thing with this group is they've got to get to the point where we're no longer talking about the potential of this group, the potential of what Chris Tyree can do, or what Logan Diggs and Audrey Esme can do, or what Logan or Lorenzo Styles is capable of, or what Tobias Merriweather might be able to do, what we think Braden Lindsay can be. And we need to be talking about this is what they are. And the reality is what they are is going to determine how the season goes. And so that's really where they're at. It's about, okay, Chancey Stuckey, you have been tasked with getting this group going. It's got to be better than it was in the past. Dylan McCullough, you're being tasked with proving that you can do with this group what you've done with Indiana and USC and other institutions he's been a part of, even the Kansas City Chiefs when he's part of a Super Bowl team. And so you're at the point now where it's time to start turning the conversation about potential into production. And that's going to be the key. And that's where Notre Dame is at. So let's start with the backfield, Ryan. I think the expectation for what this unit needs to be this year, if Notre Dame is going to be the team it's capable of, right? That's the premise, the foundation of this entire conversation. We have agreed that you and I agree that the floor, barring catastrophe, lots of injuries, things like that, is 10-2 for this football team. That's what we established at the beginning, right? Is the floor is 10-2. So what do they got to do get beyond that? And I think when you talk about this group, Ryan, the first thing that stands out to me is Chris Tyree needs to get back to being Chris Tyree. That to me is where it's got to start. Is you've got to have that home run hitter to complement your quarterback, because home run hitters mean fewer plays. Fewer plays mean less opportunity for mistakes, and it's a lot less potential issue that Notre Dame is going to make a mistake on offense if you go 80 yards in one play compared to needing to go 8 plays to get there, right? If it happens on one play, then, okay, you're in the end zone. If it has to go on 8, there's more chances for a mistake to be made. So that's kind of where it is. He's got to be that guy that is back to being the home run hitter. That's where Notre Dame needs him to be.
It's the dynamic elements. I talked about this a lot yesterday with Tyler Buckner. Chris Tyree is the type of player, Brian, where if you're not working at an efficient level offensively, it only takes one play to completely flip the momentum, because that's what type of player he is. That's why he's a home run hitter. That's why he's a difference maker when he's healthy. That's the type of player Chris Tyree is. One play where a linebacker fills the wrong gap or takes a bad angle or the defensive line gets out leveraged, whatever it is, Chris Tyree can break what should have been a 5-yard gain for most people into a home run touchdown. That's what he can bring. And I know there's other running backs in this group that I'm excited to talk about, because I think they could be more efficient runners, right? Guys that maybe can give you consistent yardage on a clip at a higher rate. But Chris Tyree is the one in this group that when things aren't going well or aren't going perfect, he can completely flip the script for you. That's what Chris Tyree is for me. This is the home run threat of your entire skill position, if we're being honest. Because, I mean, Braden Lindsay can create some big plays. There's no doubt. He can be a home run hitter. Lorenzo Styles, when you get there, can do it in spurts. But Chris Tyree is the absolute 4-3 guy where if you have a bad angle, he can take it for 6. So he's the biggest pickup, I think, for an offense, honestly, because there's going to be a game. There's going to be a drive. There's going to be a couple drives at times where maybe Notre Dame is not working at an efficient pace. And then Chris Tyree all of a sudden breaks it open, and then you get back in the groove, and that brings the morale up. He's that type of player where he's the momentum flipper, in my opinion. And that's what Chris Tyree needs to bring to this offense, because he is the explosive factor that can create those humongous electric chunk plays for Notre Dame. That's what I think he brings to this team.
Yeah. The key for him, though, is it's got to be built around efficiency. That's going to be the thing for Chris Tyree is, yeah, it's great that you have the big home runs, but what we also need to see is more 4s and 5s from him too. And I think that's what he did a good job of in 2020 is there weren't the negatives, and part of that's the offensive line, but Chris Tyree's not a shifty guy. He is a one cut and go guy. So the offensive line is part of that, but that's the other thing too, Ryan, is we've got to see Chris Tyree he's going to hit home runs this year. He's got to stay healthy. Can he do it in the run game? Last year was all the pass game and return game. Can he do it in the run game? Right. And then the second part of that is can he be efficient as well? So that way on 1st and 10, you're not getting yourself into 2nd and 9s or 2nd and 12s. You're getting yourself in 2nd and 6s, 2nd and 5s, 3rd and 2s, where you still have the potential to give him the ball and get him in space and let him go make plays. So that's kind of the other part of where that is going.
Mm-hmm.
So after Chris Tyree, it can't be alone, right? He's not a 20-carat touch guy. The second part of this conversation is the sophomore class has to step up and emerge, right? And that's Audric Estime and Logan Diggs. And I want to talk about them together because I think they need to be kind of clumped together for the specific this conversation is. That's where your bell cow snaps and carries are going to come from. This group has to be able to provide the short yardage stuff, the hammer, the stuff that wears you down between the tackles. They can both do things outside the tackles, especially Logan Diggs. But the biggest thing this group needs to bring is they have to be the group that forces the box to condense. If the box is going to condense in a lot of ways, Chris Tyree's home run ability is part of it. But then you also have to have it when these guys are on the field. And it's because they can hammer you. They're going to keep you in 2nd and short, 2nd and medium the whole game. They're going to move the chains and then open up those big play opportunities. So,
yeah, that pairing for me, Brian, is where you mentioned the short yardage opportunities. You need to keep your team ahead of the change. This is the efficiency side of the conversation for me, even more than a Chris Tyree, because they're going to continue to keep you on schedule. We talk about a quarterback being on schedule and on script all the time. Mm-hmm. Running backs can do that too. All players can do that, right? They keep you on schedule. Getting you into ahead of the chains opportunities, I think, is what we're looking with a guy like Audric Estime and a guy like Logan Diggs whenever he ultimately is deemed ready to go at 100%. And also, down the stretch of a football game, when you know you have to run the football and you're playing against the clock a little bit, those are the guys that need to wear you down a little bit and to be those efficient runners. Because at that point, you need to just continue to matriculate the ball down the field, right? Like you need to be able to really 3 yards, 5 yards, 4 yards, 6 yards, 3 yards, 4 yards. You need to be able to consistently on a clip keep you ahead of the chains. And I think those are the players. Very different players in their approach, in my opinion. And I don't want to say this all by also depreciating the fact that I do think Logan Diggs can create some big plays at times. And I do think Audric Estime can create some big plays because they have enough athleticism to create some chunk runs. We're just talking more about 30, 40-yard runs comparative to a Chris Tyree who can bust a 70-yarder, right, for a touchdown. Like, it's just a little bit of a different feel. Audric Estime, 230 pounds. He's got the hammer build to him, but I also really like his foot quickness. I think he can do a lot of things inside the tackles, making a guy miss in tight spaces. Logan Diggs, seeing his foot quickness, man, I was surprised because there was at times last year, and we talked about this, there was a lack of patience. So you just kind of hit things and you were just kind of like, Logan, like, let's be a little patient, man. Let's read the zone front side a little bit more. Maybe backside A pops open. Let's use that patience that we know you do have. And then it takes you off guard. You're like, oh, he's also a 210, 215-pound hammer. I mean, he can be. And he's got quickness and he's got athleticism. So when you couple those players together, they're the players that I think can really wear down a defense, and they're going to do it a different way. But I really think that they are the efficient runners that Notre Dame needs in this offense. You have to stay in front of the change. Too many negative runs last year. And it wasn't just the running back's fault. We'll talk about the offensive line, obviously, in this little series as well. But Notre Dame needs to have efficiency at the running back position because there's plenty of talent to go around. And my favorite part about this group is that they all are completely different. They bring a completely unique style. So when you fit them all together, I really think that the running game and the running back room can be special if they're able to really put it all together because they're all very unique in their own way.
I think Logan Diggs is the kind of the intriguing part of this conversation. I think Logan Diggs is a little bit of a combination of all the guys. I think he brings, he's not a home run hitter. Neither is Audric in a traditional sense from the standpoint of like, they're a threat to take it 80. Look, Tony Jones Jr. took it 80 plus in a bowl game, right? I mean, it can happen. Kyron Williams isn't a fast guy. He went 90 plus last year. But it's more about how that speed is something that, boy, if we don't defend him every time, he's capable of doing that. I think what he brings, however, is Logan needs to say, hey, you're a 200+ pound back. You need to be willing to play that way more often without losing his ability to bounce and make plays, because he's the one guy, he's the most shifty back they have that to me. He's the guy that can be a make you miss guy. So his unique aspects is I want to get him inside hammering people, but if you're only doing that with Logan Diggs, you're not using him correctly. Right? You have to get him. He can be your best inside out back. Chris Tyree is your home run guy inside or out. Audric Estime can do things outside in space, especially in the pass game, but he's really going to make his money on the inside. Logan, to me, is the key to the run game taking its efficiency to a whole new level, in my opinion.
Yeah, no, he's an interesting player because, to your point, Brian, you have Estime, who's more of the traditional hammer, right? Like, he's a guy that at 230 pounds, you can see it really wear down a defense. Chris Tyree is one step and he's out. He can break an angle instantly. But Logan Diggs does bring a unique skill set in the fact that he is well over 200 pounds at this point. He is a hammer, but he also has really nice speed and really nice change of direction to be an all-around weapon. And we haven't even talked at all about the passing game prowess of these players, right? Like, we just saw Chris Tyree in the bowl game have over 100 yards against Oklahoma State in only a few catches. He was in a situation where, creating big plays, not only the run game, but also in the pass game, which is big time in this regard. And I think it's going to be a big help to Tyler Buckner as well. And I will say this, I was only at one live practice this spring, but I was incredibly pleased with what I saw of Audric Estime as a pass receiver. There were a lot of instances where he was one-on-one with a linebacker, running an angle route, running a wheel, and I thought he looked very loose as an athlete and was able to create separation in the passing game. So I really am excited about the combination that you have potentially there, because then you add in Logan Diggs, who, by the way, may be the most natural of the running backs as a pass receiver, which I think is especially fun to kind of take a look at. So I think that for me, it's the all-around skill set and the diversity of these players that really keeps my interest kind of going. They are players where you have so many different skill sets that keeps me intrigued to just see what the overall volume is for each player, right? Because we've heard us talk a lot about, hey, Chris Tyree is a home run waiting to happen, but he might not be an every down runner in the sense that he's going to carry it 15, 20 times a game. Like, that's probably not his role. We're talking probably more 10 to 12, and then you get a few catches in there, and that's what you're looking at. But you look at a player like an Audric Estime, how many touches is he going to get as a traditional running back? What is Logan Diggs going to be able to do if he is as healthy as it looks in these practice clips? I'm really looking forward to seeing what do we see from I don't want to say target share, but a volume share of these running backs. Well, how many touches each game do these running backs get? That will determine for me just how successful this running game is going. Because if we get, because honestly, I've been big on the Audric Estime hype train this offseason, but I don't want to see Audric Estime run the ball 20 times a game and then the other guys just kind of fall to the wayside from a production share perspective. I need all three of them to be able to have their impact because they bring something completely different to the game. So we want to also transition, because this is another big point that we want to talk about. That's the running back room. Exciting talents, exciting diversity. Wide receivers in this conversation, I think, brings a very different layer, because I think that for me, and I know Brian agrees to this, there's not a disparity in talent from the wide receivers. We're going to talk about guys like Lorenzo Styles, like Braden Lindsey, like Tobias Merriweather, who came in this fall, like a Deion Colsey, who was a highly ranked player in his own rights coming out. Jayden Thomas is a player that we have heard multiple times from sources near the program that they love Jayden Thomas, and he's been a player that has done his due diligence and is really impressed the staff continuously through his time so far with the program. So there's expectations being thrown out about each player for their own rights. But the biggest question for me, and I know Brian will kind of reiterate this when he pops back on, is the fact that the numbers, right? It's the biggest thing, is that the numbers are not where you want them to be right now. And especially after the Avery Davis injury. And I know someone asked us yesterday about the potential of Avery coming back for a seventh season. I don't know if that's in the cards, just with the, he would have to petition the NCAA to get that seventh season. But either way, losing Avery Davis is a loss. And I'm not going to sit here and act like it isn't. I mean, if you're on the message board, if you're not, you should go down to board.irishbreakdown.com, by the way. We've talked a lot about the injury to Avery Davis and how much it stinks. And this is something where is the sky falling? No, you don't have to make it like that, right? Because there is still a lot of talent, but losing a player like Avery Davis is a big deal for multiple reasons. One, I think he has probably the highest floor of any of the wide receivers that were returning this season. We know what Avery Davis is going to do when he's healthy. With him being gone, though, and that you completely lose the floor. But my other biggest thing is, I talked about this a lot recently, is that Avery Davis is the de facto leader of this wide receiver room. He is. He's a returning captain for a reason. Everybody around him, the fellow wide receivers, they work as hard as what Avery Davis does, right? He is the tone setter for that group. And he is the guy that has earned everything he has gotten in his career. So I am really upset, and honestly, I was distraught when I heard the news, because I wanted Avery Davis to have his career end the right way. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, it was just not meant to be. But that being said, there is a lot of talent here. There is a lot of talent. Whether you're talking about a Lorenzo Styles, or you're talking about a Jayden Thomas, or you're talking about a Deion Colzie, hopefully, or Tobias Merriweather that is coming in, or Braden Lindsey, who, and I get it, trust me, I'm a Notre Dame fan. I have been my entire life. I have been waiting for the Braden Lindsey breakout since 2019, when he showed us flashes of what he could be as that gadget type player. I've been waiting for it, and it has not materialized. But I really want to start mostly, for me, with Lorenzo Styles Jr. Because while there is not a lot of, look, we saw in the bowl game and in spurts last year what Lorenzo Styles down the stretch could be. And we need him to now, we're settling with the thing, Brian, in my opinion, where it's like Avery Davis gave you a really nice floor. It was dependability. Now that you don't have that dependability, you need a couple guys to be dudes. Like, you needed it already, but it's especially important now that Lorenzo Styles and somebody else, a couple others, really step up and show close to what their ceiling is, because you need guys now to turn unproven production into high production. Like, you need that. And you've seen spurts of Lorenzo Styles. And for me, looking at him, he's my pick to be in that breakout star, because I think he can be a player lining up inside, outside, doing a little bit of everything. He's the player that gives you diversity from an alignment perspective. So as we're starting through we talked a little bit about it, Brian, the couple of the things that we're worried about is proven production is not coming back, especially with Avery Davis out now, and there's not great numbers in the wide receiver room. For me, the big starting point is you need a dude to step up, and I think Lorenzo Styles has the talent to be that guy.
I think the injury to Avery Davis has done two things. Number one, obviously, it's sort of zeroed Styles in, as we talked about the other day, into a role where he's going to play more in the slot than he was going to play. I think that also has put him in a situation where he can't just be the big play guy that maybe you thought he was going to be. He has to bring some of that dependency that you talked about. And that's really when I wrote the article about him the other day, is, sophomore, he's got to grow up quickly, all those type of things. It really comes down to that. It comes down to a situation where he can't just be dynamic at times. he has to be dynamic at times and also always efficient and always consistent. And that's the part that I think is going to be the challenge because he is a young player. You know what I mean? Even if you look at like Will Fuller in 2014 when he broke out, and when you look at Golden Tate in 2008 when he broke out, their numbers were really good, but they weren't always kind of the consistent, dependable, reliable receivers that you kind of need your best receiver to be. And he didn't have to be that. Like you look at Will Fuller back in 2014, for example, he had some big games, but then he struggles against Navy, 3 catches for 16 yards. I believe I had to drop that game. He has 3 catches for 27 yards in a win over Stanford. Had trouble kind of gaining separation on a kind of a day where it was a little bit wet and all those type of things. But you also look at it and say, you know, you had other guys on that team that could kind of provide some of that dependability, right? Well, I think Lorenzo's in a situation where, you know, you don't necessarily have a Chris Brown, a CJ Prosise, a Corey Robinson, a Ben Koyak who did a lot of the dependable things. Amir Carlisle did a lot of those, you know, those intermediate dependable things, and Will could just kind of go be the big play guy. They can't really afford that with Lorenzo. He needs to also provide some of it. So that's where the expectations got ramped up for Lorenzo when Avery went down. Is now they're in a situation where, you know, he's got to have a more mature game this year than he would have otherwise had, where he could, if he has an off day, you're okay. You got Avery, you got Braden, you've got Michael Mayer, you've got these guys. He has to be sort of the dependable guy now. He now has to emerge as the alpha at wide receiver. Whereas before, I kind of thought they could kind of do a by committee type of thing, where now it's like, well, that committee just got smaller and your most reliable, dependable player is out. Who's going to fill that void? I think that's the bigger question for me for Lorenzo, because that requires more maturity as a player than just, hey, I'm really fast and I smoked this guy. And I think that's the part of it. But now, the good news is I do think Lorenzo already has a mature game for his age. So it's not a big leap to ask him to go from what I thought he was going to be to this. And I think somewhat, Ryan, and I'm curious what your thoughts on this, just the extra snaps and slot alone are going to put him in more of those positions, in my view.
Well, here's a cliche. Ready? I know we love cliches on this show. Safety blankets. Michael Mayer is one. That is what, in my opinion, that was Avery Davis's biggest thing, right? You could depend on Avery Davis to make a snag, to move the chains on 3rd and 5, to find a soft spot in the zone. Those are things that I think you're missing most with Avery Davis. And like I talked about a lot, right? It's the leadership aspect of Avery Davis, but also that insurance, that security blanket. You don't know who that guy is in the wide receiver unit right now. You don't know because, I mean, let's be honest with it. Ready? Lorenzo Styles has shown flashes, but you saw it in a very small sample size last year. You barely saw anything of Deion Colsey last year. You didn't see anything of Jayden Thomas, really. You haven't seen anything of Tobias Merriweather because he's a true freshman coming in. And Braden Lindsey's a guy that we really like, but he also has not been the most consistently productive player during his career. So who is the safety blanket? I agree with you. I think it can be Lorenzo Styles because he's the guy where I think that he has a general understanding of how to manipulate space from multiple alignments and get open and create those plays. And I haven't seen an issue just in his 1 year of he's a very consistent hands catcher. Like you can depend on him to catch the football. And you need him, Brian. So is it a tall task? Is it a tall ask? Absolutely. I mean, he's only a sophomore. I mean, we have to remember this kid's, 19, 20 years old at this point? But not only do you need him to be a playmaker, you also need him to be a consistently dependable target in this passing game. So you're asking a lot, but the talent is there. It's just why everyone is excited. And the biggest thing for me is he's also working with a guy that I think is going to have the technical aspects of this game at an even higher level now in Chancey Stuckey working at the wide receiver coach. So I have high upside for Lorenzo Styles. It's a tall ask, but we're so excited because the talent is obviously there for him to do that.
Right. I think he's got to have other guys step up too, right? Like, and that's the other part of this conversation is it's not just Lorenzo being the only person that steps in and fills that void, right? Because Lorenzo's already expected to do certain things. He's going to take on some of the responsibilities from Avery Davis. I think what this also does is this puts a lot more on Braden Lindsey. And, I think his snaps are going to go up. I think that now he is going to be needed even more so to provide some of that big play stuff, because now, like before, you could put Lorenzo outside and he could be a big play guy. And we're going to still see Lorenzo outside. In 12 personnel, we're going to see it. In 21 personnel, we're going to see it. And there's certainly plenty of looks where you could see it out of 11 personnel as well. But I do think the slot is kind of where I expect him to sort of fit into the starting rotation. The better Braden Lindsey performs, right, to where, again, what's the talk about Braden Lindsey been the last few years? What we think he can be. But he hasn't really been that guy outside of like a half a season in 2019. He's got to be that guy. He's got to be that guy that, again, it's not about volume for Braden Lindsey. It's not. I don't care if he catches 7 passes in a game, unless it's like for 200 some yards because he just destroys somebody. That's great. I just need him to provide that big play. Hey, if you don't pay attention to this guy, he will burn you. I mean, yes. And it reminds me a lot of, and when you look at that Ohio State team back in 2014, they didn't necessarily have a guy that year that was sort of the alpha, Will Fuller type of guy. They didn't really have that year. I don't even think that they had a 1,000-yard receiver in 2014.
Was that Devin Smith? Was that close?
Yeah, Devin Smith was their guy. Yeah, Devin Smith had 33 catches for 931 yards, 28 yards a carry. Their next leading guy was Michael Thomas at 54 for 799. And then you had Jalen Marshall at 38 for 499, Dante Wilson at 21 for 300. A lot of other guys did things for them, right? And so I'm not saying that Braden Lindsey has to average 28.2 yards per catch. It was a different offense, where he was put in more one-on-ones because it was the type of spread offense that they ran. But my point is, however, is he doesn't need 50, 60, 70 catches to impact the game and change how teams are going to defend him. If Braden only catches the same amount of balls he did last year, Ryan, it's still the same thing. It's not so much about the volume of catches. It's about the impact of those catches. I mean, Braden caught 32 balls last year. He actually had more catches per game than Devin Smith had in 2014 because Ohio State played 14 games, actually 15 games that year. And whereas last year, Notre Dame played 13 and he had one fewer catch. So that puts them into a different stratosphere, right? As far as, yards, he's good there. It's the yards per catch that have to change with Braden. And to me, last year, when you look at his production and 10.9 yards per catch, that's the thing that's got to change for Braden Lindsey. Now, a lot of it was not his fault. Some of it was his fault. He needs to play better in certain situations. That's fine. But, wasn't coached worth a darn, in my opinion. And he wasn't a guy that was necessarily a precision route runner when he came to Notre Dame. So if you're not that coming to Notre Dame, like Lorenzo had that in him already. Tobias Merriweather showed up knowing how to run routes beyond what most of the Notre Dame receivers did. Deion Colsey has to be taught that. Braden needed to be taught that, and he never was.
Right.
So that's not necessarily on him. And then the other part is last year, there was plenty of times that Braden Lindsey had several steps on defensive backs down the field, and the ball just never came because of the pass protection. I mean, so, okay, he can't control that, but what he can control is answering the bell every day, right, from a health standpoint, or an attitude standpoint, being consistent mentally, doing all those type of things. And then when, go out there and do your job. And so if the balls do come your way this year, that you're able to make those plays. And if the line is what we think it's going to be, then there's going to be more opportunities for him down the field. And he's got to make those plays. And I think he can. And the more he steps up and answers the bell, the more confidence Tyree is going to have in him to say, hey, look, we got to start making sure that we're game planning more to get Braden in these situations. Once that happens, and that takes some of the pressure off Lorenzo Styles to be the big play guy, it's also going to put Lorenzo Styles in some more positive matchups. You could see then more 12 personnel where Lorenzo maybe is to the boundary and Braden's to the field in 12 personnel. Where you want to have some big guys in the box, but then speed on the outside. And so I think if Braden can step up and be more of that big play guy, that's another thing. But again, Ryan, we're talking about what ifs. And that, I think, is the concern that I have, is he's now got to show me. And look, at the end of the day, right, this is where we're at. It's just a show me business. Mm-hmm. And the flashes have been there, but I want it with this unit, especially at receiver. Running back's a different deal for me. I have fully confident running back's going to be there because running back is a position where talent can easily take over, right? And I don't care as much about proven production as I do at other positions. But because the receiving corps was coached so poorly, Like, I think the running backs were coached well. They were just young. They were behind a 1,000-yard rusher. Chris Tyree was banged up. They had a good coach last year. They've got as good of a coach, if not a better coach now with Dylan McCullough. I think they're going to be fine as long as they're healthy. The receiving core is a little different animal because there is the sort of the foundational changes that Coach Stuckey has to make. And so I think that's a thing where Braden's got to really step up and play. And here's another interesting thing. So I don't know if this is going to happen or not, but I have heard some conversation that it is possible that we may see a move of Xavier Watts. I think that would be an interesting part too, because I think Xavier Watts is a very unique combination of Braden Lindsey and Lorenzo Styles that could add some really unique aspects to it. So maybe that's a part of it. But at the end of the day, no matter who moves there, the thing that changes is when Braden Lindsey's on the field, he's got to be a difference maker. And if he is the player that I think he is, and again, we'll see, then, I think that could be ultimately, and I've said this before, I get what you're saying about Lorenzo Styles, and we agree. He's got to step up and be the dude. Sure. But I will still contend that an argument could be made that no receiver on the roster could have a bigger impact on how teams defend Notre Dame than Braden Lindsey if he steps up. And, because if he steps up and if he can be on a consistent basis what he was in the second half of 2019, you can't defend this team the same way. And now all of a sudden the run game, the quarterback, Styles, Mayer becomes much more difficult to defend, because if you're going to have a safety king on Michael Mayer, that means you're going to be leaving Braden Lindsey outside one-on-one. And if Braden Lindsey can make people pay for that, then that's the thing that, to me, that really could take this pass game over the top. I really believe that.
I have some thoughts on Braden Lindsey, and then I want to come back to you with a question. So we saw the spring into the fall, and what from people that you've heard from close to the program, Braden Lindsey just looks like a completely different guy, if we're being honest, right? Like, he is attacking every day like he never has, in my opinion. And you saw it. He looks physically more well put together than he ever has. He's playing with extreme confidence. I mean, I saw him winning through contact and finishing plays through the ground in the spring. I have a lot of optimism for Braden Lindsey. That comes out of my fandom for a second, right? Because he's a guy that I've been waiting to break out. We saw flashes early on in his career, and it has not been tangible to the big play threat that it should have consistently been, in my opinion, over the last couple of years. Some of the fault was usage, development. Some of the fault is his own. Like, let's call it what it is, right? There's always every layer to that conversation. I am, from the analyst perspective, Brian, I need to see it.
Sure.
Right? Like, I need 100%. To see it, because he is extremely talented. Talent has never been a conversation with Braden Lindsey. Everybody knows that kid's going to run 4.4 flat or better. Like, he is a fast, athletic, and explosive kid. If he wants it, I do have confidence that he is going to be a very big impact player for this team, but I still need to tangibly see it. That being said, would love to ask you, because you made an interesting comment about if Xavier Watts does make the move to wide receiver, which we'll see if that ends up happening, that you said that he has some stylistic comparisons to a little bit of Braden Lindsey, a little bit of Lorenzo Styles, has some of each player in him. I have personally never seen Xavier Watts at wide receiver. I've only seen him in games as a safety. So I would love to hear a little more background if you could. And I think maybe some other people might be interested to hear this too. What do you feel like Xavier Watts can bring to this wide receiver room if they do ultimately make that move to bring him from safety to wide receiver?
If he could, again, we don't know if they're going to move him, right? Like, I've heard some things from different sources. We need to see it, right? And I don't know if that's going to happen or not. But the reason I've advocated for him to move to receivers is because he brings something that they really don't have at the position, and that is somebody who's legitimately dynamic with the ball in his hands. Like Lorenzo or Xavier's not a kid who's going to necessarily go out and run a fast 40 time. But Ryan, you and I have talked a lot about this. There's guys that run fast 40 times, and then there's guys that are really fast football players. And Xavier is a guy that's a really dynamic football player. He doesn't have the vertical speed that those guys bring to the table, but there's two things that are unique about him. Number one is he is really good with the ball in his hands. You go back and watch his high school highlight film. He's got suddenness to him. He's got vision, like he can make people miss. And he's strong. So he's not easy to bring down. Now, I've been told he's around 200 pounds right now at 6 feet tall. Like, that's a well-built kid who also still has to have the range to play safety, right? So it's not like he's piling up weight to go play rover or something like that, right? He has some dynamic ability with the ball in his hands. And here's the other thing too. And I've talked to some former players, but then also, people that were around the team in the past. And one of the things that made it was confusing as to why he didn't play more was like he'd be in practice. The part of the reason they put him at W last year was numbers, but also because he was one of the few guys that would win contested catches. He's really good at the catch points. He's got really good leaping ability, timing. He high points the ball well. He's got strong hands. And so he brings some uniqueness to the table because he brings a strength element that the other guys don't have. Now, Lorenzo's a pretty strong kid for his size too, but I wouldn't necessarily call him a real shifty guy. Lorenzo, after the catches, make a guy miss and then outrun everybody, right? I think that's a little bit more of like how Lorenzo is. But what Xavier would bring if they move him, and again, we're not reporting that they are going to move him. I'm just saying I've heard enough to make me think it's possible. Then to me, it's a situation where he brings you that dynamic, get him a now screen, let him make people miss, right? Like, it wouldn't shock me if he's at X, catches a now screen, gets vertical for 5 yards, cuts back, and the next thing you know, he's taking it out the back door up the other sideline for a big play. He's kind of got that ability. And then you can also put him in the boundary and say, hey, we're going to throw you a back shoulder because you against this 5'10" corner, because we think, you're 5'11" corner, and we think you have the ability to go win that like a bigger player. That's the stuff I've heard about him in the past. We saw a little bit of that part from him in high school when, because he was a dynamic wide receiver in high school. Now, in the Omaha area, which is decent football. And so he has that ability. But the stuff that we've heard from Notre Dame people in the past was more of the one-on-one contested. What I saw from him in high school was the guy that's dynamic with the ball. And that's the thing, strong hands, can catch a hitch, make a guy miss, and then bam, he's getting 20 yards. I think that's what he brings to the table. And he can do stuff at slot and X, which is also something I like. And you could, we talked a lot in the past about the dynamic of if you have Avery, Braden, and Lorenzo on the field together, you can put Lorenzo in the boundary, and then the other, Avery with it. If Xavier does move, and again, this is partly my bias because I think he could be a great receiver. If he does move, he would actually be the guy I'd put in the boundary, not Lorenzo. And that would then free up Lorenzo to be more of a field guy because I want to get Lorenzo in space. I mean, I think that's where Lorenzo could be really dynamic. So I think if he can be the guy that I think he is, again, it's a big if. That's the whole problem with this whole conversation, Ryan, is we're talking about a bunch of ifs. If this guy, if that guy, if that guy. And that's the concern. That's the legitimate concern that people have. Yeah. But we're not talking about if this guy can get faster, if this guy can get shiftier, if this guy can get more talented, if this guy can play out to his full potential or beyond it. We're not talking about that. We're talking about really talented kids that need to play to their talent level. And I think if you move Xavier Watts, and I love Avery Davis, you may not have the efficiency you had, but you're going to have a guy that with the ball in his hands is dynamic. And Avery had never really been that guy. Avery was a chain mover. That could stretch the field and find open spots. We never really saw Avery like doing stuff after the catch, which surprised me because of how good of a runner he was in high school as a quarterback. Maybe it was just about not having the opportunity. That could also be it. But with Xavier, I think you bring a kid that can do some of that stuff that you just don't have. So I think the benefit is he could really add an element to your offense that you weren't going to have before the move was made. If it were to be made. And I want to make sure I'm clear. I'm not telling y'all that he's going to move. I'm just telling you that I've heard enough to make me think it's a possibility beyond just my own personal speculation and bias. So we'll see how it plays out. But that's why I think Xavier could be a big, big boost to this receiving core because as we always talk about, right, it's about complementary skills. And he brings a skill set that I just don't think they have at receiver right now. This one we keep talking about, needing to get from Dylan Edwards and some of the 2023 kids and why we wanted guys last year. You need more guys that can – and here's why it's important. If you have to play call your way down for touchdowns every single time you have the ball, it creates more opportunities where you're not successful. It also makes it harder to score enough points against the best teams on your schedule and in the postseason. You have to have some guys that can hit a home run or completely change the field momentum with one play. Doesn't always have to be a touchdown. It's you're backed up at your own 15. Tyree makes one guy miss in the backfield and outruns the defense to the other 40. You just completely change the momentum of the game at that particular moment, right? And that's what they haven't had a lot. That's what they didn't have in 2020, except when Tyree was on the field. Sure. And that was the problem. And that's what hurt them against Bama. They were able to put that like one good drive together where they just kind of hammered it down Bama's throat. But the reason they couldn't consistently do it is because Bama just said, we're going to load the box and make you beat us over the top and make you beat us on the perimeter, and you don't have enough dudes to do that. And they were right. They didn't have enough dudes to do that. Sure. And so for me, to have a guy that can, hey, you're going to do that, you throw a look screen to Xavier Watts, and all of a sudden he makes one guy miss, and all of a sudden you went from your own 15 to the other 40, that kind of thing can happen. Lorenzo Styles has the ability to do that to a degree. Braden Lindsey can beat you over the top of a defense, and all of a sudden, USC goes right down the field, scores a touchdown against you, make it 7-0, and the next thing you know, you come back on that next play and you bang a 75-yard post route against them. Hey, does that remind you of anything, right? 2015, that's exactly what happened, and that's what's so important, and that's what that 2015 team had, Ryan, and it wasn't just Will Fuller all the time. I point to the 2015 game against Stanford. Stanford takes that opening drive right down the field on Van Gorder's defense, who was garbage, by the way. I'm going to repeat again because it has to be said. What happens next? 95-yard kick return by C.J. Sanders, game changer. Stanford goes down to score again. What happens? Bam, Deshaun Kaiser throws it over the top for a touchdown to Will Fuller, right? Stanford responds again, 62-yard touchdown run by Josh Adams. Stanford was a way more efficient team that day. That's why they won. But the reason Notre Dame stayed in it was because they hit a bunch of home runs. If you can be that plus be more efficient, which I think this team will be, and have a defense that can, have a pulse, stop someone, that's how this team takes that next step. But that's what made that 15 team so dynamic. You had multiple guys on the field at a time that could change the game. Will Fuller could do that. Amir Carlisle could do that. Chris Brown could do that. CJ Prosise could do that. Josh Adams could do that, and Deshaun Kaiser and Malik Zaire, when one of them was in the game, could do that. That's what has me excited about this team, is because what a lot of people don't realize about Notre Dame, and Ryan, you and I have talked about this, this is a far more explosive athletic team than people realize. This isn't the 2020 team. This is a team that's got some guys that can run. The question is it's not a track. This isn't a track meet. It's not. It's a football game. So I don't care what your 40 time is. Can you make the big plays with the ball in your hands? Can you take the top off the defense? That's going to be the key. The talent is there, Ryan. They don't need to add anybody else besides Xavier to get there. There's not some magic, if you can go get a guy that's still in the portal, that's the talent is there. Styles, Lindsey, Xavier Watts, as far as just the home run hitters, the talent is there. They got to step up and play their game. Then you get into some of the bigger guys. You were talking about Jayden Thomas earlier. Then those guys got to provide that role. It's there. They just need to show, because, again, no matter everything we say that gets me fired up and all this kind of stuff, it still always ends with a but. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? But they need to show it. And that's where we're at. And that's the thing is, but the talent is there. And people say, why are you so optimistic about the season? Because I'm like, the talent is there. Like, I have no questions about the talent. It's just, is that talent going to turn into production? Is the potential going to turn into production? That's the bigger question mark.
I mean, and it can. I mean, when you hired me, you said, I think he's going to do a great job, but
he's got to show me.
100%. Yep. And that's what this wide receiver group has to do right now, man. It's there's so much
shameless self-promotion, Ryan Roberts.
Yeah, it's shameless. Someone's got to pump me up once in a while. But, I mean, you're 100%, man. The talent is all there. And, I mean, if a Watts move does happen, that's very unique in that sense. Because, I mean, we talked about a couple of the guys like a Braden Lindsey, Lorenzo Styles. They're more going to create their big plays off of their vertical ability. There's not a ton of guys that are after-catch dynamos, potentially, at that spot, right? So, I agree. These are momentum shifters, right? Like, that's what I keep calling it. It's momentum reversers. Mm-hmm. You think about even last year, Brian, like think of the Wisconsin game, right? They take the lead, and then you kick off to Tyree, houses it, and then that's the momentum completely flipped. Like that's what those big plays can create to you. So I think this could be a really good wide receiver room, but until we see it, it is going to be a question mark. But the talent is obviously there.
And that's the concern, right, Ryan, is that's where the hesitation comes from, is okay, it's just so many ifs, and this isn't a game you want to have a bunch of ifs. That if Tobias Merriweather, if Jayden Thomas, I think the good news for me is that I'm hearing enough from people that I trust that we are that those things are continuing into the fall is a positive sign. And I think now that they've established who the starting quarterback is, now there's going to be more and more and more reps with the quarterback that allow them to get on, the same page. And I think that's going to be the key. But, like you said, Ryan, until they show it, it remains a question mark. And I think we've seen this before, though, right? Like 2014 was a major question mark at wide receiver. I mean, if you think it's a question mark now, imagine what it was like in 2014. To refresh people's memory, Notre Dame's best receiver in 2014 was supposed to be DeVaris Daniels. But he got suspended. If you remember, that was like late in the year, he got suspended along with Kavari Russell and Ishaq Williams and some other guys because of the academic thing that happened. So you're looking at your receiving core and you're thinking, what the heck are they going to do, right? Chris Brown was coming off of a year where he had 15 catches the year before. As a freshman, he caught 2. He was your most experienced pass catcher with 17 career catches in 2 years, which is less than what Lorenzo Styles had and way fewer than what Braden Lindsey has. Yep. Then you had 2 rising sophomores in Will Fuller and Corey Robinson, who combined for 15 catches as freshmen. Now, Will Fuller's 6 catches went for 160 yards, but, I think like he had a big game against Air Force, which kind of helped pump his numbers up a little bit, right? I think it was Air Force. 2 catches for 93 yards against Air Force, which means over half his production was against Air Force. He had 1 catch for 37 yards against Michigan State, 1 catch for 11 against Oklahoma, 1 for 5 against USC, and then 1 for 14 against Pitt. I mean, his moment came against Air Force. And so, you look at Corey Robinson, he was a nice player, had some potential, but it was a lot of what CJ Prosise was another guy that was a big part of their pass game in 2000, ended up being a big part of their pass game in 2014. He ended up catching, let me go look at his numbers, what his numbers were in 2014. CJ caught 29 passes for 516 yards that year, 17.8 per catch. Well, he came into that season with 7 catches for 72 yards in his career.
Yeah.
Right. But he steps up and plays well. Chris Brown goes from a guy with 17 career catches to 39 for 548. Will Fuller goes 6 career catches to 76 for over a grand 15 touchdowns. Will Fuller had over twice as many touchdowns in 2014 than he had career catches coming into that season. Right. Corey Robinson has a good year, 40 catches for 539 yards. Ben Koyick was steady. Amir Carlisle, provided some production in the slot. So we've been here before. And this is why I say receiver is not a position I'm overly concerned with past production if the talent is there. And that's the question. Is the talent as good as I think it is? That's what I don't know, because you don't really know until you see it, right? I think it is, but that's what you don't know. And somebody pointed out, CJ Prosise started his career. That was actually CJ's junior year, 2014. He started his career as a freshman at safety. So the year he caught 7 passes was a year he just moved over from safety. So I think that's kind of where I'm at, Ryan, is we've been here before. Will we see similar breakouts in 2022 that we saw in 2014? That's the bigger question. We saw it a little bit in 2018 as well. You saw Miles Boykin go from a guy with like 13 to 18 career catches in 3 years to a breakout season. We saw, Chase Claypool late in that year become a more proven, productive player. We saw Chris Fink go from, a guy, we forget in 2018, Chris Fink was a very key part of that offense. He caught 49 passes for 571 yards, had a huge play against Michigan in the opener, had a great game at the end of the year against USC. The year before, Chris Fink caught a grand total of 6 passes. The year before that, he caught 10 passes for 172 yards. He came into that season with 16 career catches. That's fewer than Lorenzo Styles, way fewer than Braden Lindsey. So we've seen it before, and they were coming off a year where they were a huge, heavy run team. So we've seen this before. Now we see but that doesn't mean this group is going to do that. It's a different group of kids. Right. And so if they're capable of it, then that's where your production comes from. So it's not like we're like pie in the sky. I hope this happens, but it's never happened before. We've seen it happen quite a bit. It's just, is this group capable of it? That's the question mark.
And maybe it's unfair because, you work on, it's a recency bias thing, right? You've seen plenty of, you talk about just the sophomores that have broken out for Notre Dame at wide receiver with the Will Fullers of the world, but then you talk about late breakout guys like Javon McKinley and, and Miles Boykin and that brand too. There's been several years where I would say that there was some uncertainty over the wide receiver position in Notre Dame. But then you go into, you kind of do like the end of the year recap and you're like, oh, it was actually pretty good, man. It wasn't bad. Like some guys stepped up that we thought could step up. So maybe it's unfair to this group, but the fact that we've seen it so often happen in the past, it does gives me hope that it's probably going to happen again. Like it's a trend at this point.
It's why we're optimistic. And it's not just Notre Dame, right? I mean, I've pointed this out before. Chris Olave as a freshman had 12 catches for 197 yards, right? The next year he goes out and 49 catches for 849 as a sophomore. We saw this with John Mechie at Alabama. John Mechie had a phenomenal year in 2020, has 55 catches for 916 yards, only plays 13 games. And the point being is he would have been over 1,000 if it was a normal non-COVID season. And then obviously this past year breaks out and has a monster year, 96 catches for 1,100 yards. As in 2019, Ryan, he had 4 catches for 23 yards. He went from 4 catches for 23 yards, which means he had less production than Deion Colsey, to 55 catches for 916 yards the next year in 13 games. So, I could do this for like every team. I could just kind of keep going down the stretch.
Stick with Alabama, man. And go with Jamison Williams. How many catches did he have at Ohio State before this breakout? I mean,
now again, those guys were first-round talents and all that. But what I'm saying is they don't need to be what Jamison Williams was. They just need to be what Chris Olave was as a sophomore. What Corey Robinson was as a sophomore. They don't even necessarily need to be Will Fuller, because what this team has that the 2014 team didn't have is Michael Mayer. Right. That's a big difference. What they needed Miles Boykin to step up and be the guy in 2018, because Alizé Mack wasn't Michael Mayer. Right. And so that's the other thing too, is when you kind of sprinkle this in with a little bit of the tight end talk, is you're going to get more production from the tight end position than you've gotten in those other years that we've talked about. Because you've got such a dynamic player. And so I think that's the other thing that leads to my optimism, Ryan, is, this isn't like an abnormal thing at receiver. This isn't like let me find my couple examples to prove my point scenario. I could do this all day. Right. And that's the kind of thing that you look at and say, okay, that's where my optimism comes from. I mean, T. Higgins as a true freshman had 17 catches for 345 yards. That's very similar to what Lorenzo Styles. He had 2 touchdowns, and the next year he goes out and he has 59 catches for 936 yards and 12 touchdowns, and they win a national championship. Right. Yep. So, I think the question that comes down to, Ryan, is, okay, what's your confidence level in the talent of these players? I think that's the argument. Whether or not they can or can't step up is not the conversation. It's, are they as talented as you think they are? I think that's what they need to prove. And because
I think that's a certainty. It's a certainty that they're very talented, right? Like, I mean, I would be very surprised if this was an absence of talent conversation if it doesn't develop the way that we want it to. I think there's going to be other factors that are going to prevent that development if it does happen. So to your point, I think that there's a lot of talent in this wide receiver room. I'm excited to see the upside of the conversation, to the point. And I think that we're going to see a lot of production, obviously, because you're going to throw the football. Someone has to catch it at some point, right? But I do think that there's going to be some big surprises on this unit. And you mentioned guys like, what does Jayden Thomas do this year? Does Braden Lindsey have the breakout? There's a lot of question marks, but ultimately, to your point, you're going to feel okay about it because there's not an absence of talent. The talent is all there for it.
Right. You just kind of think back to different years, Ryan, and you talk about, okay, but here's why this is different. Okay, it's different because you're having to move a receiver, a safety to receiver because of the injuries. Well, no, you're moving a former receiver back to receiver.
Yes.
Which is way more proven than moving a receiver who was previously a safety who had never played running back in his life to running back because of injuries, which is what they did with CJ Prosise in 2015. And he goes out and runs for 1,000 yards. And that's why I kind of point to is you kind of go through all these other different guys and you say, if the talent is there, the cream rises to the top. That's the conversation, is like, if the talent is there, then I think you can have that conversation. And so I think when I look at this Notre Dame team, I think that's where the discussion is going to be. If they don't step up this year, and do what we're talking about here, Ryan, then the conversation comes down to, okay, maybe the talent level isn't what we thought it was. And I think that, to me, or the other example is obviously what we talked about, is going to be if there's injuries, more guys get injured. And I think that's where the kind of the conversation comes from, is that right there. So I love the talent of this group. I really do. I'm very concerned about the depth. And that's why I think the other part of this is the margin for error. We talk about the margin for error, right? And that's the big question mark. Can they afford if this guy doesn't step up, if that guy doesn't step up? But again, that's kind of what draws me back to that 2014 season again, is because it was very similar that year. The depth was not great on that receiving core in 2014, and they did what they needed to do to get done and win the game. So, that's kind of where I'm at, Ryan, is, you got somebody complaining in the chat about, Xavier Watts doesn't win you a natty. No one's saying Xavier Watts has to be your number one wide receiver. But to act as if Xavier Watts can't be a part of that, I'm sorry, I think you're misguided, right? The reality is that the team just won a national championship with Jermaine Burton. I could make the same argument. You're cherry picking different things. It's about, what does this team have the ability? You're talking about a group that has a lot of highly ranked receivers. If you're one of those people, it's a group that has a lot of speed. If you're one of those people, it's a group that's got some size in it. If you're one of those people, it's got all these different aspects to it. What it doesn't have, Ryan, it's not missing talent. It's not missing size. It's not missing speed. It's missing depth, and it's missing proven production. I think that's the key. That's the key to it. And that's where they need to be.
Yeah. And I like that you mentioned a couple minutes ago about Michael Mayer. I really do think that one thing that is going to go Notre Dame's advantage a little bit is that all eyes are going to be at 87, right? Like, there's going to be one-on-one opportunities, and I am going to feel confident about Lorenzo Styles and Braden Lindsey and Tobias Merriweather and Jayden Thomas. I'm going to feel good about those guys getting one-on-one opportunities. That is going to be a huge, huge help. Instead of them rolling coverage to maybe the wide receiver that's hot on a given day, the eyes are always going to be at 87, because that is the proven commodity at this point. So you need wide receivers to be able to win one-on-ones and create plays that way. And I have confidence that all of them will be able to do that. It's just, to what extent, how high can this team be this year is the big question mark. But again, that's not going to be if it does not fully develop, I don't think it's going to be a fault of talent. It's just going to be circumstantial in a lot of ways.
Yeah. Yep. So, Ryan, before we move on to the mailbag, first of all, we don't have a lot of questions starred. There's been a lot of good discussion in the chat, not a lot of questions. So we'll get to some of the questions here when we get to the mailbag. But I did want to circle back to the TV thing at the beginning. So the reason I stepped away is because I had someone call me and they wanted to address kind of the report that's coming out there. So the report is not so much that Notre Dame that's where the negotiation is with NBC, but that's what's being floated as the number that's being discussed is the conversation. So I did want to make sure that is clear. They kind of walked back sort of this isn't a thing where like they're in negotiations with NBC and it's about to be a done deal. It's not that kind of thing, which then leads to sort of what we talked about, which is this sounds like it's a number that's out there. Is like hey, if you want to get in the ball game, here's the number that we're talking about. And so I think that's kind of that was what I was discussing. And so somebody called me to kind of say, hey, look, here's where things are at, and here's what we think how this thing should be. So I wanted to make sure that was pointed out as part of the conversation. So before we move on to the mailbag, Ryan, I enjoyed that conversation with the receivers and running backs. I want to remind everybody, hit that like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. And if you're listening via podcast, please give us a 5-star review. Sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We have a ton of great discussion going on over there. Lots of good intel going on over there as well. So definitely sign up for that. So let's move on to the mailbag, Ryan. We had a couple super chats that we want to get to here as we find some more questions. And I'm going to start at the top. And if you want to star the ones at the bottom, Ryan, to kind of help us get. So I'm going to go back top and see if I can find some more. But we did have a super chat from Randy Hernandez. Randy, thank you very, very, very much for that, buddy. I appreciate it. Keep up the good work, guys. Brian, you have a great product. I appreciate that. We appreciate that very much. I got a great team, and we're hoping to continue building that soon. So I do appreciate that, Randy. And then Brandon Plesner asks, Do you think Notre Dame renews its contract with Under Armour or go with another brand? Is there any intel regarding this? When is the UA contract officially up? So I don't really. I've heard things, Brandon, but as far as where Notre Dame stands with another brand, most of the intel I've heard is just who's in the mix. Nothing about where they're leaning. So I don't want to presume to say I've heard they're leaning this way or that way or with Under Armour, away from Under Armour. I've only heard about who's kind of involved. And that's the only thing I'm really comfortable saying is that I do know that there's a lot of other entities involved with this. So there's going to be plenty of competition. But I don't know where Notre Dame is in regard to their happiness with Under Armour. I don't know where Under Armour is from a business standpoint. I know they've had some struggles in recent years. Ryan, I don't know where they are in regard to can they afford to even be in the conversation with what Notre Dame's asking price is going to be. Not even asking price, but what they're being offered by other people. There's a lot to this that I just don't know. So I don't want to pretend to start saying this is the direction it's going to go because there's just so much that I don't know. I just know what I will comfortably and confidently report is that there are a lot of people involved in the conversation, which is going to always drive the price up. When there's multiple people involved, it drives the price up. So I expect it to be a much bigger deal than it was last time. Will it be with Under Armour or somebody else? That I don't know. So I can't answer that. I actually kind of like Under Armour's gear. Like I like Under Armour clothes. For me, not for like Notre Dame, like for me. I've been told their shoes aren't good. I've never worn Under Armour shoes, so I can't say. I have no clue. I like their gloves. I mean, football-wise, I think that there's some things I'd like to see them change. That I don't love I don't love the jerseys they've created for Notre Dame. To be honest with you, a couple of them of the road jerseys were pretty cool. I really like the 2015 Shamrock Series uniforms. When you see them like a fan wearing them, they look pretty sweet. When you saw the mannequin, it looked pretty sweet. It just looked really bad on TV because the numbers were same colors. I mean, just you couldn't see who was who in a lot of ways. Yeah. But I don't know why a lot of people don't like Under Armour. I actually kind of like the way that they look. I just wish that they would I think a lot of people dislike Under Armour. This is my opinion because they don't like the color of the pants. I get that completely. I hate the color of the pants. I was told by a buddy the other day that the expectations that the pants will, because we keep asking about this, right? So I was told that they're probably going to have the mustard pants again this year, but you can expect that to change down the road. So we'll see if that's true or not. So
that's the best news of today.
Yeah, I know, right? News. Yeah. So that's just what I was told from somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody. So just take it for what it's worth. I like I said, I like Under Armour's clothes. I think they're comfortable. I think they fit well. And everybody knows I'm a very anti-Nike person. Not because I don't like the quality of their clothes. I don't like their business practices and
that's fair.
Their hypocrisy towards things when they're doing what they're doing and they're going to make statements about things in our country and all that other stuff. So Nike can just,
But their clothes are fantastic.
Shine it up real nice, turn it sideways and stick it up there. Okay. That's my thoughts on Nike. So John A1 says, I think he meant, can Jayden Thomas play the pro slot role that Tommy Rees has been looking for, or will we see something else, Ryan?
He can. Yeah, I think that him and Lorenzo Styles are the easy ones for me for that. Because Jayden Thomas is going to be a little bit of a bigger slot, right? Like he's not going to be the slot that you would envision, right? Like he's not a Cole Beasley, Wes Welker, like that type of slot, even like an Antonio Brown type of slot. Like he's a very different football player in that regard. But he has some of that quick twitch to him, and he has size, and he can finish through contact. So I think Jayden Thomas could be an interesting player in the slot. I also think Lorenzo Styles, although a little different than Jayden Thomas, can be that pro slot type because he brings a pretty good combination, in my opinion, talking about both players, to length, size, and then also I think they have quick twitch enough to navigate space. So I actually do like Jayden Thomas in the slot. I think it's an interesting fit.
I do. In this offense, yes. And here's the other thing too, Ryan, that we learned a little bit about the spring, the little bit we've seen of Jayden Thomas, he showed himself to be a guy that can make people miss in space. And I think that the combination of his size plus that, and if you go back and read some of the evaluations I did of him in high school, I talked about the fact that he's actually pretty good with the ball in his hands, which you wouldn't necessarily expect for a guy his size. And so I think that's not a must for a pro style slot. But if you have it, I like it. And I think
he's
yeah.
You know how Juju Smith-Schuster's been used by like the Steelers is kind of like that pro slot, right? Like he's more physical than like the quick twitch type of guy. I imagine Jayden Thomas would be in a similar vein to that, right?
Yeah.
Like you're going to win more off of physicality and the size than your quick twitch ability, but you have enough quick twitch where you can navigate enough space. That's what I kind of see with Jayden.
Yep. One of the things this is a quote that I had from him in my film analysis of him when he signed. I said, Thomas has above average speed and he's a quality all-around athlete. He's smooth, fluid, and shows the ability to do damage after the catch. I mean, so that's something that we saw from him in high school. And, my follow-up was you wouldn't expect a player that lacks top-level speed to be as good with the ball in his hands as Thomas is at the prep level. I said, but his balance, vision, and strength allow him to shine. And I think those things all translate. That's from when he was in high school, when he was healthy. I think, Ryan, all those things show that. And another thing I wrote about him then, because again, that's one we've only seen him in high school, right? We haven't seen him play a single snap of college football. I said his feel for route running is impressive, and it's even more impressive when you consider he splits the year playing football and baseball, knows how to use his size to get off the line, and his feel for the nuances of route running is outstanding. Thomas also has good ball skills, and he's an excellent blocker. All of that, Ryan, fits to a pro-style slot, the way that Tyree has used in the past. Now, it's not the only type of slot you can use there, but it fits to what Tyree likes to use there. So I think all of that translates. If that is who he is still, and from everything we've heard, I think it is, those are traits that translate to the next level and translate very well to that slot. And so those are part of the reasons why, again, we've never said, I think the people saying Jayden Thomas has a chance to be really good are nuts. He's not. It's just, I don't know. I haven't seen the kid play a healthy snap of football since his junior year of high school.
Sure.
So that's why I have a hard time doing it. But the talent is there.
Perfect segue, Brian. I'm going to jump around a little bit.
Sure.
Brandon Plesner said, B. Ryan, who's the best blocking wide receiver currently on the roster? You just talked about Jayden Thomas's blocking a little bit, so I guess I'll go to you start here. Who is the best blocking receiver on this roster right now?
Well, I don't know. I mean, again, we've seen Lorenzo and we've seen Braden, but none of the other guys we've ever really seen play. I'll tell you who I think it's going to be. So Joe Wilkins is a steady blocker. He's a solid blocker. But if they move Xavier Watts to receiver, I think your two best blockers this year are going to be Jayden Thomas and Xavier Watts. The reason I say about Jayden Thomas, he's a big kid. He's their biggest receiver, just pound for pound. And I talked about it in his high school film. The one thing I loved about his high school film, there's a lot of clips of him. He put a lot of high school blocking tape on his highlights. That tells me something about a kid. It's either A, you suck and all your good plays are of you blocking. That's not the case for Jayden Thomas. Or B, you take pride in blocking. And that's something that I think is true for Jayden Thomas because it's a way, like it's another way for me to dominate you. I'm going to dominate you as a pass catcher. I'm going to dominate you in the run game. I'm just going to pretty much dominate you all day. So just prepare yourself for that. And that's the kind of the way that Jayden played when he was healthy in high school. And even when he wasn't healthy, the one thing he could still do is block. And so and Xavier's a really strong kid who also was a pretty good blocker in high school. So I think Jayden Thomas and Xavier Watts will be the guys in contention for that if they move Xavier Watts. If they don't move Xavier Watts, then my prediction is going to be clearly Jayden Thomas. But again, this is a prediction because I haven't seen him play a single snap of college football.
Right.
But I'll be shocked if he's not a really good blocker.
Look, and I don't care if he's not on the roster right now. The answer is Jaden Greathouse. It's going to be Jaden Greathouse for the next 5 years. All right. That's going to be the answer because my guy is a dog. But in all actuality, to Brandon's question, my pick would be Jayden Thomas just because I don't know if Xavier Watts is definitely going to be a wide receiver or not. Like it's just speculation at this point. Jaden is what's he, 215 pounds, right? Like he's a dense dude. I mean, you saw it just in the blue and gold game, man. Like he is physically advanced further than you would think of a sophomore. So I think that he is the easy answer for me as far as blocking. I look forward to seeing Tobias Merriweather also as he continues to fill out that frame because obviously he's got some massive levers, man. So if he's able to extend, then he should probably be a good one as well. But right now, I would say Jayden Thomas just because he's physically pretty developed at this point.
So you have another one up here from Brandon Plesner. B. Ryan, do you think Miles Brennan stepping away from football has anything to do with how the QB battle is shaking out in Baton Rouge?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, from what I heard, he wasn't going to be the starting quarterback for LSU. So that was kind of the writing on the wall. And I guess it wasn't worth it at that point for him to continue. So he made the decision for himself. So Brandon, everything. I thought I saw someone put a report out there, but I don't want to misspeak here. But everything I heard it was going to be Jayden Daniels either way. So I think that was kind of the writing on the wall for Myles Brennan. And I feel bad for the kid, because I feel like he was promised some things, and then they went back to the portal after he
hold on. I'm gonna
Yes.
stop that blasphemy right now. You're telling me Brian Kelly was misleading to a player, especially a quarterback? I don't believe you.
I think he may have misled.
I don't believe
Myles
you.
Brennan a little.
I don't believe you.
He might have misled a
Brian
little.
Kelly has never misled a
Just
quarterback
little.
on something. I don't believe you. And then for people who don't know, I'm being incredibly sarcastic right now.
Yes.
So yeah.
I feel bad for the kid though.
I do too.
I think Myles Brennan has had so many injuries during his LSU career. He's played pretty well in spurts when he has played.
Yeah,
but it's very unfortunate how everything unraveled for him. I wish him the best though. I think he'll be a good professional, whatever he does. Just unfortunately, it didn't work out for him in this circumstance.
It's disappointing because, as you said, he's been a good player when healthy. He struggled to stay healthy, but he was in the. I mean, look, first 3 games of the 2020 season. Against Mississippi State, he threw for 1,112 yards, 11 touchdowns, and three interceptions that year. Played 3 games. 3 games. Threw for 345 against Mississippi State, 337 against Vanderbilt, and 430 versus Missouri when he got hurt. Threw 3 touchdowns, 4 touchdowns in those 3 games before he got hurt. And obviously LSU wasn't great in those games, but yeah, I mean, when he's been healthy, Myles Brennan's been shown some potential to be good. And instead of transferring somewhere else, which is what he was planning to do, he got talked into coming back by Brian Kelly, who then later went and got Jayden Daniels out of the transfer portal and convinced him to stay, and it didn't work out for the kid. Look, the kid made the decision to come back. He shouldn't have. But, it just sucks that he's going to be ending his career instead of being able to chance to play another year somewhere else. But that's what happens when you make a decision to be part of Brian Kelly's franchise, right? Because it's all about what's best for Brian Kelly. And once you no longer serve a role to that, you're of no use.
And some more context to the numbers that he put up in 2020. That was after losing Justin Jefferson, who went in the first round after the 2019 season, and Jamar Chase opted out of that season as well. So Terrace Marshall was a good player, but he was off to a really good start, especially with a lot of turnover at wide receiver for LSU that year as well.
Yep, no doubt. No doubt. He was a good football player. Terrace Marshall had 11 catches for 235 yards. So, Terrace Marshall went for over 100 yards 2 times in those 3 games. He played 4 games after that before. Did he get hurt or did he just check out? I forget why he stopped. Did he? A little bit of both?
So there was an injury designation, but I've heard that he checked out. Yeah. Yep.
But he played 4 games after Myles went down, and he only had 1 100-yard game. That was against Texas A&M. So, I mean, clearly those two connected pretty well when they were in there. But and they also lost a guy that you didn't mention that they lost off that team. Is they lost Thaddeus Moss off the previous year's team as well.
Who was a good player for 2019 team.
Right. Lost Clyde Edwards-Helaire out of the pass game, who caught 55 passes the year before as a running back. So he lost a ton of talent. Yeah.
Who went before Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift that year, which is also patently absurd, but that's another
again, look, he didn't lack talent. I mean, he had Keyshawn Boutte was there. You had Eric Gilbert as a freshman. I mean, he had some players, but again, they were all young, and he was young. So you hate to see it for him, but unfortunately, that's part of the game. It's part of the game. Mr. 2.0 says, my one thing with Xavier is he isn't viewed as a likely starter at safety. Isn't he viewed as a likely starter at safety next season? What about Chance Tucker to receiver instead? He seems like a good frame for it. So a couple things. Xavier was going to be part of that conversation next year, which is why I think there is some trickiness to whether or not they will or won't move him. Is if you're Xavier Watts, you're going to be in the rotation this year, and you're going to have a chance to start next year, potentially. It's not a given, though, for 2 reasons. Number one, it's not a given that Brandon Joseph is going to leave after this year. It's not a given. I mean, if we were predicting, I think we would probably both predict that he will, just because we think he's going to be really good and one of the best safeties next year's draft. But it's not a given that he's going to leave, number one. And then number two, look, there's a pretty good freshman coming in next year who's going to have something to say about who starts at safety next year. And I know that people don't like playing freshmen, but Peyton Bowen's a kid that I think has a chance to come in and play day one. And so, but he would have played there. But I think that's the thing is if you're Xavier, you need to sit there and say to Notre Dame, like, A, you're not moving me again. So if you're going to make this move, it's a permanent move. I don't want to move to receiver and then move back to safety next year. And now I'm playing catch up again. If I'm going to move, you're going to move. And if I'm going to move, it means you're going to play me. And if I'm him, like, look, Xavier's already taken a couple for the team. At this point in time, Xavier needs to look out what's best for Xavier, in my opinion, right? And I don't know if you agree with that, but after as much as they've jacked him around, he's in a position where he needs to be able to say, look, no, I'm not moving unless you're going to promise me you're going to play me. I think that's a big, important thing. And so if he does move, I would think that there has to be some sort of assurance that he's going to play. I mean, I would. If I was advising him, that's exactly what I would advise him to do, Ryan. But as far as Chance Tucker, there's Jaden Bellamy is another name that I've heard mentioned. The reality is none of those guys are helping you in 2022. Mm-hmm. And you're not taking a guy from another position who's battling for playing time so that he goes and runs on the scout team. You're not doing that. That's unfair. That would be, you're not taking over the team. You're screwing that kid at that point in time. Right. And there's things you can do in practice that allow your corners to get tested with your number ones, even if the scout team receivers aren't great. But if you got Matt Salerno and Connor Radigan down there playing receiver, those are good football players. I mean, they're going to give you a decent look. Plus, you can do things in 1-on-1, 7-on-7, half field reads, where you are challenging each other in the weeks that you need to do that. So I think they can get out of it, but I think that's a legitimate concern. And safety depth chart next year doesn't look as good as it does now. But I would argue that there's other options that they have for safety. Clarence Lewis, if the other young corners step up, I would love for Clarence. I've said if Clarence Lewis is a starting safety at Notre Dame, my opinion of him as a player would be tremendously different because I think that's a role that would fit him very well. Philip Riley's a guy that I think could move there, especially with the corners. You've got if you moved Philip Riley and Clarence Lewis, you'd still have two corners in the sophomore class that would go into next year with 3 years of eligibility left. You'd have two corners in the current class. That's Chance Tucker and Ryan Barnes. You'd have two corners in the current freshman class, or 3 corners in the current freshman class in Jaden Mickey, Benjamin Morrison, and Jaden Bellamy. Plus, you'd have 2 corners coming in next year, at least one of which could crack the rotation early on in Christian Gray and Micah Bell. You'd have 7 corners. Even if you moved Clarence Lewis and Chance Tucker, you'd still have 7 cornerbacks on scholarship next year. And so, to me, that they've got the numbers at corner to move guys to safety where, honestly, Ryan, I think their games are better suited and still move Xavier Watts, the receiver, who also I think is better suited as a wide receiver. That's my bias. I'm being honest. I do believe he's a better receiver than he is a safety. So I'm just going to be honest with you. That's my personal opinion, my bias. So I think there's plenty of options there to still have the depth and the talent to be good at safety, even if you did move Xavier to offense.
I agree. I mean, you have options. There's options here. It's really interesting to see because, I mean, I really want this to be the final move for Xavier Watts, but I don't know if it's going to be. It's one of those things where you mentioned it. It's almost like a recruiting pitch, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the staff needs to kind of sell him on the vision. Like, what's the next step for me? And is that the step, right? Like, because I feel like it's just so back and forth with Xavier Watts. If he is going to make the transition, I want him to play. There's no doubt about it because, I mean, he has done everything you've asked of him, switching positions, doing all that type of stuff. And he had some nice spurts, I thought, last year at safety. Like, I thought he had some really good signs. But if you're going to make that move, I don't want to sacrifice development just to fill a number, right? Like, if he's going to make the switch, I think it's because he's going to impact you in 2022. So interesting to see. Chance Tucker, the wide receiver. I mean, I've never seen him catch a football or run a route, so I can't answer that conversation. I mean, I have seen Xavier Watts run routes though on his high school film, so at least I know that he's done it. So
and he's done it at Notre Dame. That's the other thing about Chance Tucker and Jaden Bellamy. If you move them to receiver, they're starting from scratch.
Yes.
A year ago today, Xavier Watts was playing wide receiver at Notre Dame. 7 months. No, let me think here. So he didn't move until like October, I believe, is when he finally moved. Late September, early October is when he moved. So he's spent more time at Notre Dame playing wide receiver than he has safety. As far as not, so that's the other thing too, is that's why Xavier's really the only option that can help you because he's the only guy that knows the offense. He knows the plays. He knows the alignments. He knows, I mean, you're not starting him from scratch. It'd be like taking a Chance Tucker, basically like you signed a freshman who didn't go through spring ball and then missed the first 2 weeks of fall camp, and wasn't even allowed in meetings. He had mono, so he's sitting in the dorm, not in meetings, not in film, not doing anything, not getting any coaching. He's literally starting from scratch 2 weeks in the fall camp. That would be what Jaden Bellamy and Chance Tucker would be going through. That's not fair to them, and it doesn't help you. Xavier Watts can get up to speed much quicker. Yeah. And Tommy Rees knows what Xavier Watts can and can't do at wide receiver because he coached him for 2 seasons. So that's why I think Xavier Watts is the one that makes the most sense. And the only way that I would not move him is if he says, no, I don't want to. And I can't blame him. I can't blame him if he doesn't want to do that. I completely understand where Xavier would be coming from if he decides that's not what he wants to do. I just hope he does move because I think he can help you. And I really do. I think Xavier Watts could move, and by the time you get to September 3rd, that kid's playing for you and helping you. And then as the season goes on, he can help you even more. But that's where that's why I like him there. And those other guys, they're just not going to play there, right? I mean, that's the thing is you're not helping those kids at all. You're not. They're not going to play. I mean, if they have to put Chance Tucker wide receiver or Jayden Bellamy wide receiver this year, Notre Dame's in big trouble. Big trouble. That's not the case with Xavier Watts, in my opinion. It's just,
that's like an emergency option type of thing.
Right.
Like it's that would be completely out of necessity, not out of just a guy being a guy, right? Like that's I agree completely to that.
Yep. Next question that we have from Brian J. Irish. Brian and Ryan, is this really Ryan Day's best Ohio State team ever? I keep hearing this on multiple Ohio State podcasts. I just don't see it on defense. I think even Archer would tell you that
that's absurd. Yeah.
The Ohio State podcasts are full of homers. I mean, they're not giving you real analysis. They are about as homerish as you can be, most of them. I was on an Ohio State podcast today with a guy named Jay Stevens. He seems much more reasonable than most of the stuff I hear from Ohio State. But I don't think this. I mean, 2019 to me is still Ryan Day. His first team is still his best team. They had a great offense that year, and that was the only team they had that had a good defense. That was the Jeff Hafley. 2019. That's the year that Jeff Hafley was their defensive coordinator. That's the team that took Clemson, the defending national champs, down to the wire. I mean, they're an interception in the end zone away from beating Clemson in 2019, and that was a good Clemson team.
Sure was.
So I don't think this is his best team. No, I don't. Mm-hmm. I don't know what you think or where it stacks up, Brian. I think it'll be better than his last 2 teams. I do.
You think so?
I
Even
do.
2020?
Yeah, because I didn't think they were that good in 2020. They played 6 freaking games to get to the playoffs.
I still think that, like, from a full roster perspective, they were just more like a better team overall.
I put it like this. I don't think they were, but I'm not going to argue with you about it either. You can have a good conversation. I just don't think the team was that good because they missed all of spring. They missed all of that was not they were not well coached. They made a lot of mistakes. They were talented, but they weren't a great team because of all that other stuff. That's my issue with that team. If you want to go maybe like NFL draft prospects, you could be right. But I was never impressed with that team. I thought the Clemson game was a bit of an anomaly. Mm-hmm. What we saw against Alabama in Northwestern and Indiana was more indicative of what that team was than what we saw against Clemson. But it was talent. And I think the Clemson game speaks to what you're saying, Ryan, is whatever you say, Brian, there's one thing about that team. It was very athletic and talented. That I'll give you. I'll definitely give you. It was a very athletic team. I just think it was a great team because of like all the issues I've mentioned. That team had no business being in the playoff. 6 freaking games.
I know.
6 games.
That whole season was a mess, man. The whole Big Ten and Pac-12 cancellations and all. That was a mess. It was absolutely a mess. I would agree, though. 2019, just off the top of my head, like, that was a good football team. It really was. That first year with Justin Fields, like, they were a really talented team. So that would be, I don't see this team being as good as that. Like, that's. Yeah, I think that's high expectations, very high expectations.
How about this? Could this be their best offensive team?
Yes. Yeah, you could say
that 2019 team was also pretty good on offense.
Sure.
But that would be my question for you is because they beat Cincinnati that year. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, no, I was just going to say this past year, you had 2 first-round picks at wide receiver. You had another that caught over 1,600 yards. You had a 1,000-yard freshman as a running back, and you had a quarterback that threw 48 touchdowns or 40 something touchdowns, whatever it ended up being. So it could be, though. I wouldn't put it past.
Sure.
We have to see what the development of the other wide receiver are outside of Jackson Smith and Jigba, like if Marvin Harrison Jr. really is that guy, or if he's just a really good player. But it could happen for sure. I expect the offensive line to be a lot better than last year, which would be a big
yes, I agree. Here's why I would state the case for why it has a chance to be. Now, the thing about that 2019 offense is, yeah, obviously Justin Fields, and you had good receivers. You had Chris Olave, KJ Hill, Garrett Wilson was a freshman, Austin Mack. Yep. They had a great running back in 2019, and he was a veteran, J.K. Dobbins. And obviously last year's offense was really good too. But here's why I'll make my case. That year in 2019, they had a first-year starter quarterback in Justin Fields. And while Justin put up insane numbers that year, he played a pretty soft schedule that year. It was. Mm-hmm. They had a lot of inflated numbers because of the schedule, but they did blast Cincinnati 42-0. They scored 38 on Wisconsin the first time they played. They scored 34 on Wisconsin the second time they played. And if you remember, that was a really good Wisconsin defense. Yeah. They hung 73 on Maryland, 52 on Northwestern. I mean, they blew a lot of teams out, but I don't think those were really good teams. I thought Michigan was very overrated that year. And I just kind of felt like they just out-talented people that year. The thing I like about this team potentially, and again, I don't think it may be true by the opener, but it'll be true by the middle end of the season, is they're not going to have to rely on the receivers to be so dang good. Your C.J. Stroud's going into year 2. And I think to your point, I think where the offensive line is going to have the biggest benefit to Ohio State this year is I think once it kind of gets their groove, because, you're moving some guys around and Notre Dame's moving guys to guard, where I think it's a little easier to move a guy from guard to tackle, even if you did used to play that position. You've got some new guys stepping in, all those type of things, but they're changing the mentality just like Notre Dame is. That's why you hired Justin Fry. He is Steve Adazio disciple, physical, run the ball. UCLA was a pretty physical running team last year, Ryan. Now, will he be able to get him going as quickly as we expect Harry Hiestand? I think that's the question mark. I think that's to me is the big question, because you had 2 young studs last year, quarterback and running back. They're now a year older. I don't see them regressing, so I don't think the receiving core has to be as good as it was last year, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. Now, will it be better than 2019? So that's the thing is, so it's either last year or 19, right? I don't think the 2020 offense was that great. And again, for all the reasons we talked about, not that they didn't have talent, but they didn't have an offseason. Right. Mm-hmm. They're going through a global pandemic. You can't be around each other for several months. Right. And we're going to have a season. These kids had mentally checked out because they didn't think they were going to have a season. Right. You had guys, I think some of their players who actually went in the portal and were going to leave, if I remember correctly, before they decided to come back. I think that's what happened. But it's 19 or 21. I think receiving core in 2022 should be still better than the 2019 group, in my opinion. I think your leading receiver that year was KJ Hill, if I remember correctly.
Yes, that sounds right.
So, I expect them to be better there. Let me actually go look at this real quick because I want to make sure that I'm accurate. Yes, Chris Olave was their leading receiver in 2019. KJ Hill, yards-wise, KJ Hill was their leading receiver in catches with 57. Gotcha. They had Benjamin Victor. Garrett Wilson was a freshman. You had Austin Mack, who was banged up that year. Your tight end was Jeremy Ruckert, who only caught 14 passes. And then J.K. Dobbins caught 23 balls. So when I looked at this team, Jackson Smith and Jigba is better now than what anything they had in 2019. Because again, Chris Olave was young, and KJ Hill's a nice player, but that's it, right? He doesn't start on this team, in my opinion.
No,
I don't think he does.
I don't think so either.
So I think the talent at receiver is better, and I'll make the same argument for them that I just made about Notre Dame. I don't care about experience as much at receiver and running back. I don't. I care about talent. If you have the talent and you're getting coached well, you're going to be good. Right. And that's why I think they're going to have a good receiving core, better than 19. I think Travion Henderson and J.K. Dobbins is a really interesting conversation that we could probably do a whole show on.
Who's really good?
He was really good, but I think that Travion Henderson has a chance to be really good. Is he going to be 2,000 yards and 21 touchdowns good like J.K. was in 2019? No, I don't think he's going to be that, but I think he's going to be good. And I like the depth at running back this year, even with the Evan Pryor loss. They're not as deep as they've been. I like Notre Dame's depth better. I've said this before in the past, especially when we thought they're going to have Jadarian Price. But losing Evan Pryor, who it was announced today that he's out for the year with a knee injury, really takes a big hit to that depth. Yeah. But, it's going to come down to the O-line, Ryan. So, backfield in 2019, a little better than this group. I think the receiving core is better. Is C.J. Stroud better than Justin Fields? That's a debate we can have. But I think the offensive line is going to be the big key. Is the offensive line going to play to its potential? That, I think, is going to be the difference. But there's no question that the defense will not be what it was in 2019.
Yes.
No way.
Not. Absolutely not. Yeah.
No way. They don't
Yeah.
have any. They do not have a Malik Harrison and Pete Werner at linebacker. I don't care how much you want to sell me on Steel Chambers. He ain't Malik Harrison and he ain't Pete Werner.
Would never say that he is either. Would
Yeah.
never
Had
say
Jordan
that he is.
Fuller on that team. You had Chase Young on that team. You had Baron Browning on that team. You had Jeff Okudah on that team. Like that defense was way better than this defense, in my opinion. And I don't care. Yeah. He is not a wizard.
No argument.
Right? Jim Knowles is not a wizard. He's not happening. So that's where I'm at. Very good question. Very good question.
Very good question.
P-Dub with a recruiting question. What is your thought on the new DN target, Jayden Moore? Also, how many Jaydens do we have on the team? That's a good question. I want to say one thing real quick, Ryan, to preface before. Every time Notre Dame offers an edge player, that's not the guy they're targeting. It's them expanding the board in case there's a need for them to expand the board, right? So this is just them doing their due diligence, and I'll leave it at that. But it does not mean that he is that guy. P-Dub is not saying that, but that's been a kind of a common reaction every time they offer a kid. So he's just a guy they're adding to the board. That is it. Now, Ryan, as far as kind of things that maybe you don't like, how he kind of would fit in that position, I'll allow you to answer it. And yes, Notre Dame likes recruiting guys named Jayden, apparently.
Yes.
Jayden and Jalen, a lot of those guys.
Jayden Greathouse, Jaden Osbury,
Jaden Mickey,
Jayden Lamar.
Jalen Bellamy, Jayden Bellamy. Yeah, there's a lot of Jaydens on Notre Dame's football team.
Yeah, no, there absolutely is. Jayden Moore. So let's start with the interesting stuff, right? You want to go to Max Preps and check out his stats for a second. He was on a team in 15 games, I think it was, or 16 games it may have been. He had 155 total tackles playing on the edge, 30 tackles for loss, and 17 and a half sacks. So he had some just absolutely stupid production last year as a junior. That was in one season, by the way. That was in one season. He plays in California. This is what he is stylistically as a player. 6'3", 225 pounds listed. I watched this film. I saw a decent amount of twitch. I saw change of direction. I saw a frame that I think could add a decent amount more weight. And he is a relentless football player. He played hard from snap to snap until the end of the whistle. I like that stuff a lot. I'm missing bend with him right now, and I'm missing real ability to win outside track. I actually thought he had some decent power. Like he was a pretty good speed to power converter. So I think as he continues to get bigger, he has some pop in his hips and he has some ability to gain weight and have those types of upside. I'm looking forward to seeing him for his senior season because the production's wild, Brian. Just from a 1 year sample size, he had some silly production out of the state of California. So we'll see. I just, people are going to want to compare him to a certain player, right? And he's not that guy. But it's an interesting edge group that they are building. The board that's with guys like Caleb Herring and guys like Blake Purchase. They're interesting football players, and I look forward to seeing how he develops. All I know, though, is that he has some nice moments on film, and he has some just absolutely absurd production to him.
Next question. John Zabrowski asks, Ryan, what is Lindsey's ceiling this year? Could he blow the roof off and be a first-round pick?
No way to the second part, John, in my opinion. He's just not the high-volume kid to ever warrant that value, in my opinion. Look, if Braden Lindsey plays up to his talent level, I think he's a draftable player for sure. I just think that you're going to be dealing with 1 year of production and you're going to be dealing with limited volume. And he's not the biggest guy in the world. So I think he's more a mid to late day 3 type of football player if he puts it all together. Teams are still going to, quote unquote, gamble on him a little bit because they've only seen if he has a big season, he's had spurts of productions in the past, but it would really only be one big year of production, right? So I think that it's still a day 3 type of football player, but he has a big opportunity to make himself a absolutely draftable player based on the traits he has. But we'll see.
Kevin Park asks, don't you believe the entire season on offense is dependent on the offensive line? Only to a degree.
Not all of it.
Look, if the offensive line plays great, but the quarterback stinks, it won't matter. If the quarterback plays great and the offensive line stinks, then it doesn't matter. I think those are the things to me. Sorry, Ryan, I'm getting like a million things going on. So 87,000 people texting me and needing this and needing that and all that kind of stuff. So I apologize, but look, if they're going to be a great offense, they all got to play well.
Sure.
The quarterback's got to play well. Running back's got to play well. Receivers got to play well. Tight end's got to play well. Offensive line's got to play well. But I will say this: I think that the biggest neutralizer the biggest sort of the thing that could hurt the team the most is the offensive line. The offensive line can't do it by itself. But where I'll give Kevin's comment a lot of validity is the offensive line struggling can drag every other group down much more so than any other position. Because if the quarterback's not great, there's things you can do to get to be okay there, right? Receivers can step up. You can design plays. You can scheme certain things to give your quarterback success, right? If the receivers are just okay, there's other things you can do. If the offensive line's not good, it drags everything else down. And the perfect example of that is last year. I think Notre Dame had a lot more talent on offense, and people realized they just never got a chance to show it because A, they were poorly coached from the technical level at receiver, and B, the offensive line stunk for most of the year. So that is what I will say, Ryan. What say you?
Yep. No, I agree with a lot of your points. Offensive line, I think, can be the huge tone setter, obviously, to an offense. And I'm a traditionalist in the fact that I think you win from the inside out. So I think it could definitely you saw the limiting factors of the team just last year, right? I mean, Kyron Williams was making chicken salad out of chicken bleep a little bit at times, right? Like he was doing that type of work for this team. And we had a question yesterday about how much Jack Cohn's arm strength maybe was limited at times because the offensive protection was not as good as it needed to be at times, right? So I think as long as the offensive line is better, I think that you're going to see those playmakers have a lot more opportunities. And I agree with you, though, Brian, to the sense of like if a wide receiver group isn't great, there's still other ways that you can supplement that production, right? You can supplement rushing production to a degree as well. Passing, the quarterback versus offensive line conversation, I feel like that could be a pretty decent back and forth, But I think that the offensive line really can hinder things a lot more than we would even anticipate sometimes. So I agree with you. It does. I agree to Kevin's point. I think offensive line is the main factor that will kind of set the table, but I definitely don't think it's the only factor. Everybody needs to play well.
Now, there's a question that Antoine had, Ryan, and I want to throw this at you. Antoine is a Michigan fan. He's another one of the non-Notre Dame fans that does a great job in our chat, so we welcome him. Here's my question for you, Ryan, because I actually think there's some merit to this. It says Jim Knowles' defense is designed for his pass-happy conference it came from. I still want to see this defense do something against tight ends and fullbacks with all them safeties. So let me speak to that, just my initial thoughts, Ryan, and I want to hear your thoughts on this. I think Oklahoma State was pretty good against the run last year. The thing is, though, it wasn't necessarily a league that was great at running the ball per se. It's not a conference that necessarily has a bunch of great rushing teams, but I actually think they were a pretty good rush defense last year. I will also say this. That wasn't necessarily a trend of all his defenses. And I do think he has coached in leagues that are a little bit passive. Because he was in the ACC before that, also not a league that's designed around physical, powerful running teams. But I also think one of the misnomers about the Big 12 is the Big 12 was a little different deal last year than it had been in previous years. The Big 12 had a lot of teams that could run the football last year. Baylor was a physical running football team. Iowa State had the best running back in the country, in my opinion, last year. Now, his production wasn't always there because, like I said, at times they didn't run it as much. But if I could have any running back in the country last year, I'd probably take Breece Hall. That's just my personal opinion.
Iowa State's offensive line was terrible
last
year too, which people don't talk about at
and
all.
He still averaged 5.8 yards a carry, had 20 touchdowns, and rushed for over 14 yards. And he doesn't exactly have like burners on the outside taking the pressure off of him. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. Like if Charlie Kohler is the guy, Charlie Kohler is the guy that you're expecting to take the pressure off of you. You get where I'm going with this, Ryan.
Yep.
So I actually think the Big 12 was a little bit more physical last year than it had been, and that's when his defense was at its best. So I don't know if I accept the premise that his defense is designed for that, although it is true that he has come from leagues where it was a bit more of a pass-happy type of situation. So I'm having a little tough time kind of answering that, but I don't think it's necessarily geared to that. I'll say this: if he is intent on running a 3-3-5, I would be happy if I'm Notre Dame.
It's adapt to survive, man. I mean, look, he adopted more of a 3-3-5 approach because of the teams that he was playing against, right? I mean, like they're like, to your point, they may have been a little more run heavy than in recent years this past year, but for the most part, the Big 12 has been a pass happy league over the last few years. So you have to adapt to have the production in that department if you are a Jim Knowles at Oklahoma State in recent years. I will give him some leeway to Antoine's question because I do think Jim Knowles is a really smart defensive coach. So I do think that he will adapt, and I think that he will find his footing. I think that what does play into Notre Dame's favor, to his point, though, is the fact that Notre Dame has some tight ends, obviously, that they can throw out there and they can create some mismatches, I believe, especially Michael Mayer, obviously. He's a proven commodity. So early on in the season, I think that there are ways that you can take advantage of Jim Knowles, especially if he is sticking sort of to what he's done in the past. But I think by the end of the season, Jim Knowles, or even by the middle of the season, probably, I do think that Jim Knowles is going to be much more of a diverse defensive scheme. I think you'll see some 3-man. I think you'll see some 4-man fronts, but I think he will adapt eventually to fit into the style of the league. But I do think it is a legitimate concern early on to heavy run teams, to teams that utilize tight ends. I think Notre Dame can take advantage of some things early on, but I do have faith that Jim Knowles will figure it out because I do respect him as a defensive mind.
Yeah. There's something else about it that I hear this. I've seen this from several Notre Dame fans, and I don't understand it. John Zabrowski says Ohio State has a good secondary, in my opinion. The rest of the defense is pretty weak. I've seen people say this before. I don't get that. Ohio State ranked 96th in the country last year in pass defense and yards allowed per game.
Yep.
You know, they weren't exactly a defense that also was necessarily good at, you know, yards per attempt. I mean, they gave up over 400 passing yards to Tulsa in a game that was more competitive than the final score would dictate. I don't really understand why some people actually say that. I'm really having a hard time with that.
It's just names, you know.
Right.
I mean, like Denzel Burke's a talented kid, Cameron Brown's a talented kid, Ronnie Hickman's a talented kid, but it hasn't been great, obviously, right? That's why those rankings and why those numbers are the way they are. If Jim Knowles can get the best out of them, then maybe, sure.
Yeah. I mean, they just had a guy transfer in from an Oklahoma State defense that Notre Dame threw for over 500 yards against, and he was considered their first or second best player. You know, it's like Tanner McAllister, who Lorenzo Styles torched for a touchdown on the first drive of the game. So, I don't know. I just don't see it. I've had somebody say Josh Proctor's a first-round draft pick. Okay, I guess. I mean, I don't know where the heck that's coming from. But to me, if you put Notre Dame and Ohio State's secondaries together on a roster, 2 of the 3 best players are Notre Dame guys, in my opinion. And the reason I guess I have an issue with this is because those same people a lot of times will then say Notre Dame's secondary is the big question mark. Notre Dame was better statistically last year than Ohio State was. I think their top-level talent's every bit as good as Ohio State's is, and Ohio State has question marks in the secondary just like Notre Dame does. I don't understand this constant drumbeat of Ohio State's good. I still feel like people are living in the past. Like, this is not a Jeff Okudah defensive backfield. This is not the 2015 backfield with like 3 first and second round picks in their starting lineup. I don't see it. Now, I could be wrong, and maybe it was coaching. Maybe their secondary was just horribly coached, and that's possible. And to a degree, it is true. Statistically, at least, part of it was coaching. But I don't think this is like a Ohio State defensive that we've seen in the past that had like 5. I mean, like 2015, Marshawn Latimer couldn't even get in the starting lineup, right? Like, that's how insane that secondary was. This isn't that, in my opinion. Denzel Burke's a good football player, but I just think because he's at Ohio State and started as a freshman, there's an assumption that he's a future top 5 NFL draft pick, and I haven't seen that yet. That, you know.
I think it's a little bit of both areas. Like, I do think that it's oversold because it's the Ohio State thing for sure, and the lineage they have had producing defensive backs. But then it's also, I mean, talent-wise, they're much better than the 97th. That should be the 97th ranked pass defense. But until they prove it, that's what they are, right? So we'll see. They have upside, but have to put it together. So
I guess I don't know, man. Even the upside, I don't know. I don't see it. I really don't see it. I mean, this same secondary gave up over 400 yards 3 times in 8 games in 2020. You know what I mean? Like, at what point? I mean, I know coaching was bad, but dude, you know, I don't know. I guess we'll see. I guess we'll see. I hope I'm right. That's one thing I will say. I sure hope I'm right.
I hope you're right
on
too.
this one. Yeah. So let's get to some more here. We ended up getting some really good questions here today. So I really like these. Let's get to this next one. Connor Patton says, why does Notre Dame always get so many injuries before the season begins? Is this normal? I don't think I necessarily agree with the premise. I think that they've had some injuries. I think there have been years in the past where that happened a lot, like that's when it was under a different strength program. I don't think they've had an abnormal amount of, it's just been some key guys like Maris last year, Kevin Austin the year before. The only concern I have is that there's been a lot of foot injuries. That makes me a little bit more concerned. I don't want to speak beyond that because I'm not a medical professional and I don't know why that would be. But, I mean, this is going on around the country. I mean, Ohio State just lost Evan Pryor for the season. They've got depth issues at cornerback. Texas just lost some players. Who was it? North Carolina lost their starting running back to a season-ending injury. There was another Notre Dame. Torrey Stiletto from Clemson is going to be out I think he's out for the year. He was supposed to be a key part of their rotation. Right now, E.J. Williams and Bo Collins are both out right now. Expected back by the time the season starts, but they're out right now. Xavier Thomas got hurt again. He should be back by the time the season starts, and I hope he is. I would hate if that kid goes down with another season-ending injury. It doesn't sound like that's going to be the case, right. But everybody's doing this. This is football. I think the difference now is we see it more because of how saturated we are with news. Where Twitter can just tell us, like, you just see all these posts about this kid's hurt, that kid's hurt. I don't think it's absolutely that abnormal. I think some years it's more than others, but I think a lot of them are just tough breaks, and I don't mean that in like any kind of like trying to be funny, pun intended kind of way. It's just sometimes stuff happens. And I don't know if it's that. I just think we see it more at Notre Dame because we follow Notre Dame more. But it's happening all over.
Yeah, no, it stinks every year. I mean, whatever team that you root for, I mean, whether it's on the NFL, college level, whatever, like injuries are going to happen. We're playing a contact sport. We're playing a very violent sport with a lot of athletic guys, a lot of powerful dudes. And I mean, that's just the reality of the situation, right? Like injuries are going to happen. I don't think it's abnormal at all. It's a couple ones that you don't want to see.
So far.
Yeah. Well, yes, I'm sorry. Is there wood here?
Yeah. Got some behind you.
I do. But I mean, but to your point though, it's just, we cover it so closely, right? Mm-hmm. You're like, oh man, Notre Dame's getting hit by the injury bug a little bit, but it's like, is it more than any other team really is dealing with it? I mean, like you said, Texas just lost Roschon Johnson. I mean, Roschon Johnson. Johnson's his last name, right? I think.
Yeah, I think so. The receiver you're talking about? Yeah.
No, the running back, former high school quarterback. Now they're backup running back.
I thought they also lost a receiver. Or am I thinking Roschon was? That's what I'm thinking.
Oh no, I'm sorry. So Roschon went down for a couple practices. Isaiah Nair was the one that's out for the season, the wide receiver, and then their starting guard, junior something, is out for the season as well. Right. So I mean they've been hit, and again, if we were a Texas recruiting podcast, which would suck, then we could we would hyper focus on those guys getting injured, but Notre Dame is what we know. So
good question. Very good question. Let's get to some next here. Robert Bishop says, why didn't Coach Holtz continue coaching at Notre Dame? If I remember correctly, he went to South Carolina after us. So he clearly wanted to continue coaching. It's funny. I was talking with a friend of mine last night about this. And I think it just kind of got to the end of his tenure at Notre Dame. There was a lot of things going on. He had health problems. If you remember, there was a time when he was wearing the neck brace on the sideline, and there were some games he coached up near the end where he was coaching from the press box because of health issues. His wife, Beth, was having health issues at the time. There was a lot of stuff going on at the institutional level. They were fighting him along the way. And I just think he was burned out. And I think that he didn't feel appreciated by Notre Dame, and he wasn't appreciated by the Notre Dame administration. But if you remember, he did leave Notre Dame and coach at South Carolina, but there was 2 seasons in between where he didn't coach. So I think he needed that time to heal, get his mind right. And, he went to South Carolina, went 0-11 in the first year, and then led them to bowl games the next 2 years. But I think he was just burned out. And I think he was being pulled in so many other directions. He was doing all the speaking engagements and all that kind of stuff that I think he just was burned out, and Notre Dame was not appreciating him. And I think those are the different aspects of it. And so, Ryan, we did answered this question earlier, but I just needed to pull it up because of the name. This is great. Yes. BK PTSD victim. Is there any more intel on Xavier Watts moving back to receiver? Also, first time doing live chat. Excited to be here. Well, we're happy to have you here, certainly. As far as intel, except I have not heard definitively that the move is going to be made. I have heard enough intel to make me think it's definitely an option. We'll find out for sure if that's going to happen or not, hopefully here soon. But I am not reporting here that is definitely happened. I just think it's going to happen from what I've been told. So when it will happen, is it definitive? Are they just going to give him a try? Or are they going to cross train him? I mean, there's so many other things I don't know. That's why I don't want to just come out and say he's moving to receiver, because there's a lot. It could just be just part-time. He's going to play both. I don't know. So, but I just love the name BK PTSD victim. That's so great.
You should start another podcast, Brian, called BK PTSD something.
Yeah.
In which you just talk about all your Brian Kelly stories. That would be fantastic.
I would actually be a very popular podcast. I'm not going to do it, but it would be a very popular podcast. Yes. There's no doubt. John Wayne's Winchester. Brian, you mentioned that the receivers as a group can run. How many secondaries in the schedule will they be faster than? You want to take a crack at that, Ryan?
Yeah. I mean, let's think about it. We're
so Ohio State.
Yeah.
Right. Yep. Is Notre Dame faster as a unit than Ohio State is? I think it's close.
It's close.
I think that's one that's close.
Point.
Yep.
Yeah. That's a close one.
Marshall, Cal, no. North Carolina, yes, in some spots, but as a whole, I think Notre Dame.
I would give him the edge. I mean, outside of, I know Tony Grimes is a talented football player.
He can run.
Duck, I think, is a tough kid, but I don't think he's like exceptionally fast.
He's more savvy cover guy, physical. I think that he is the flat out can run. They have another young kid whose name escapes me right now who can really run, but they're more. They got a couple guys at the top. As a whole secondary, no, they can't run with Notre Dame. You have BYU, no. Stanford, no. Again, couple really good players in the Stanford secondary, but if we're talking about faster, the question was faster.
Kelly kid or whatever.
But he's not like a burner, I don't think. You know,
he's just long.
Right.
He's
the safety that they had last year that missed a lot of time, I think is a good player. Again, whose name escapes me. I'm having one of those days, Ryan. I'm having an old guy.
You're good, man. You're good.
But he's a good player. But speed, no. Syracuse, no. Again, Garrett Williams is really good.
This is actually a conversation, though.
You think so? Top to bottom? See, I think they got two guys that can run, but I don't know.
They have two. I mean, both their starting corners can really run.
Right.
Garrett Williams can run, and then Deuce Chestnut on the other side can run as well.
Yeah.
So the one-on-one matchups, I think, are a little comparable, but
safety,
I agree with you.
Yeah.
From a full scope,
right.
Notre Dame does.
Okay, so let's say their two corners can run with Braden Lindsey and whoever the W is. Who's running with Lorenzo Styles in the slot?
Exactly why
that would be my thing. Point. But it is kind of funny that Syracuse is one of the few teams that we are talking about having the kind of speed, because a lot of people may not assume that. But like you said, Garrett Williams is a kid that's getting a lot of day one, day two NFL draft conversations, and he can run, like you said.
This is weird to think about, but they may have the best cornerback duo on the schedule for Notre Dame.
Yeah, I mean,
Deuce Chestnut had a quietly really good.
Ohio State should have be in the conversation.
A good one,
right?
Yeah,
sure. I think Clemson has some guys that have some reputation. I don't know if I would put them there. I'm not a huge fan of their secondary, which leads us to them part of this conversation. I don't think Clemson's secondary is as fast as Notre Dame's. Now they may be better players, but speed. USC's secondary is not what it's been in the past. It's not there. BC, no. Navy, no. Who are we leaving out? I mean, it's really Ohio State and Syracuse as the potential two best, speedy secondaries, and then the conversation of who's the best corner tandems. I think it comes down to Syracuse or Ohio State.
Yeah.
Again, because I think Ohio State's secondary is overrated from the way people are hyping it up, but I'm not saying they suck, right? There's good players there. This is not Jeff Okuda. This is not Eli Apple and Von Bell and Ward. Yes. Right. It's just not that. Maybe next year, but not.
We'll see.
Not right now, in my opinion.
That's fair.
Mike Michaels asks, who will be more ready as a true freshman, Merriweather or Greathouse? Jayden Greathouse.
I would say Jayden Greathouse. I think it's a conversation piece because we've literally have seen Tobias Merriweather come in and already compete at a pretty good level, and that he's going to, we believe, have a role in this offense, or we think strongly that he's going to have a role in this offense, right? But I mean, Jayden Greathouse, if he's anything, has an incredibly high floor. So, I mean, I honestly think that I'm not for the reclassification thing, right, Brian? And it's already past that conversation point
Mhm.
anyway. But if you could dump Jayden Greathouse right now onto this year's roster, I feel like he would come in and he would compete. He would compete for playing time,
Sure.
just as from a floor perspective. So I would lean Jayden Greathouse, but I do think it's a really good conversation. I would accept either way.
I think they're different. I think that Tobias to me brings more vertical ability as a freshman than Jayden has. But I mean, honestly, if you're just going to talk about physically ready to play, he is the most physically ready to play receiver since Michael Floyd in 2008. Just body. I mean, just he's going to be big enough and strong enough to play like a veteran day one. He's also a really savvy kid that comes from a pretty nuanced offense in high school. So, yes, I would say I would. And that's partly why Jayden has gone way up in my rankings, Ryan, is because of that floor is so high that I think he can be that guy. But part of my answer is going to be well, what are your needs?
Right.
I mean, ready to do what? Ready to be a vertical player? Okay, well, that's Tobias Merriweather.
Sure.
Vertical be a pure boundary that can win one-on-ones. That's Tobias Merriweather. A guy that's going to come in and physically be ready to compete and maybe catch at a higher volume. That's Jayden Greathouse. Mm-hmm. And so it just depends on what you're looking for. But yeah, Jayden is a pretty advanced, nuanced player. There's no question about that. There's no question about that. He's certainly the most ready to play as a freshman. How would you rank the 2023 class, as much as we love it, in just regard to playing as a freshman? I would go Greathouse, Rico, Braylon James, Dylan Edwards. As far as full-time receivers. That's how I would rank it.
Yeah, I agree. Which is pretty funny because, I mean, if we just fully open up the scope to just playing in general, then Dylan Edwards maybe bumps up the list because he's probably going to be a return man pretty early.
100%. Yeah. And he can do some things out of the backfield and all that. Yeah. But I'm just talking purely as a receiver. Just come in and play as a receiver. Would that be the order you go with?
Yeah, that's the exact same order because I think Jayden Greathouse, like I said, is about as college ready as you can get. I think Rico Flores, I mean, from a route running perspective, Rico gets it, man. Like he understands it. He plucks the football consistently.
And that's where I'm coming from, right? Like it's like Braylon James can play as a freshman just by his God-given athleticism and size alone. I'm simply referring to their game. The other reason I put Dylan Edwards at the bottom is because he's never played receiver before. So I'm talking about from a standpoint of where they are in their receiver games. Braylon James, the thing he has over Rico is he's got the size and the speed over Rico, which will help him. I'm just talking about where their games are. That's how I would rank their games. Like whose game is most ready to play as a freshman, and it's Jayden Greathouse and Rico at the top in that regard. 100%. At least based on what we know right now. And we'll see what Braylon James does this year. He's been working a lot on his route running and different things like that. We'll see where he comes, but that's kind of where where he is. All right, let's see. Tom Flavin says Freeman's knowns, attracts top assistants, recruits dudes, effective game plans, in-game recruits dudes, inspires new culture. Unknowns, develops dudes, effective game plans, in-game adjustments, comments. So where I will disagree with you, Tom, is as a head coach, we know nothing about any of those things other than the attracts and the first part, right? So I mean that's kind of like a rigged game a little bit. We don't know about any of those things. What we do know of him as a defensive coordinator, however, is he does develop dudes. He does have effective game plans. And I do think they did a good job last year in making in-game adjustments after the first couple weeks.
Sure.
I thought they did a pretty good job of making adjustments in-game when he was the coordinator. Now, how will he be as a head coach? That I don't know.
Different level,
and I understand why there's doubts about it because they didn't make any really, great adjustments on defense in the bowl game until it was too late. And on offense, I actually do think they made adjustments. I just don't think there was anything they could really adjust to that was going to work once they realized, like, okay, the offensive line can't run block and the receivers can't get off a press. So
not great. Yeah. Let's talk about limiting factors. Those two things can limit you a little bit as an offensive play caller. But I mean, to your point, Brian, he has shown that he can do those things as a coach. It's just now a different perspective on how well he can do those types of things. So I agree completely. Right. But the things we know, he's a very attractive personality. Right. And he can definitely recruit and bring and get people to buy in. Right. Because I'm bought in. I think you're bought in. Like a lot of us are bought in.
Oh yeah.
He can attract. The question is now tangibly as a head coach in the head coaching role, can he do it? It's a question mark, but it's going to be a fun ride.
Here's a question. John Zabrowski says, I'm going to give you a chance to respond to this, Ryan. Jackson Smith-Njigba is the best college receiver since Keyshawn Johnson. Ignore Calvin Johnson, who had like 24 catches. I just want to say Calvin Johnson literally never caught fewer than 48 passes in a season in college.
Yes.
Like literally doubled up whatever number you threw out as a true freshman. He also, the next year, he had 48 catches for 837 yards as a freshman. He had 54 catches for 888 yards as a sophomore. And he had 76 catches for 1,202 offenses and 15 touchdowns as a junior. No idea what you're talking about.
That was playing with Reggie Ball, too.
Thank you. Thank you.
Wasn't great.
He did not play in the triple option. He played for Chan Gailey.
Yes.
So I don't know where that came from.
And
so
he's also, all due respect to Jackson Smith-Njigba, really good college receiver. Maybe this conversation completely changes if he has a dynamic season close to what he had last year. But, we've seen, you remember Larry Fitzgerald at Pitt?
That was Devontae Smith 2 years ago?
Right. There's been some dudes, man. There's been a couple good guys,
Yeah.
Sorry. Yeah. So, we'll see what the resume looks like at the end of the conversation because, again, we have a full season of Jackson Smith-Njigba at least. Yeah. But there's been some guys. There's been some other dudes.
He wasn't even Ohio State's best receiver last year. Most productive because everybody's trying to stop their best, right? Yes. I'm sorry. Garrett Wilson was their best receiver last year. So it is.
And I didn't even. Someone just put in the chat, man. If we're talking about just a single season, Jamar Chase was dumb.
Oh my gosh, yes.
He was dumb.
Dude, you could argue they had two receivers on the team better than Jackson Smith. And this is not a knock on Jackson Smith-Njigba. He's a really good player. It's just this is not even a debatable thing for me. Just
Michael Crabtree. How about Justin? Do you want to see a nuts profile? Go look at Justin Blackmon's game by game.
Oh gosh, yeah, at Oklahoma State.
Oh my.
Yeah.
It was crazy, man. His worst game was like 8 catches for 100
What
yards.
was his last year? Because you showed this to me one time, and it was really, what was his last year? He was in the 2008 class. So what his last year been, what, 2010?
2007? Wait.
No, he was part of the 2008 class. Justin Blackmon.
2008.
He was part of the 2008 recruiting class. He was part of the Michael Floyd, Julio Jones, AJ Green recruiting class. Also some really good players there.
So he came out as a junior, right? So
right. So they've been 2010.
Yeah, I think
so.
Right.
Justin Blackmon that year had 111 catches for 1,782 yards and 20 touchdowns, and only played 12 games. Here is his by 8 for 125, 10 for 132, 6 for 174, 10 for 127, 13 for 190, 10 for 207. By the way, he's scored a touchdown, at least one in every single game. 5 for 157, missed the K-State game. 10 for 173, 9 for 145, 10 for 130, 8 for 105, 9 for 117. That was his
8 for 105 was his worst game. He was nuts, man.
That was his sophomore year. That was his redshirt sophomore year. So he did, And then 2011, he had 121 catches and 18 touchdowns.
He was one of the biggest wastes of talent, man. And it was just
in the NFL, you're talking about?
Thing. In the NFL, he was so good. And he was even pretty good as a rookie for Jacksonville. And then it was done from there. And it was just personality stuff. That's the tough part is scouting, man, is like kid was just phenomenal. He made Brandon Weeden into a first-round pick. Let's be honest about this, right? 28-year-old Brandon Weeden went first round because of Justin Black.
Yeah. Like Devontae Smith in 2020 had 117 catches for 1,856 yards and 23 touchdowns. Only played 13 games because of COVID. It wasn't a typical 15-game Bama season. It was more of a Notre Dame type of season. 117 catches for 856 yards and 23 touchdowns. There's been some dudes. Jamar Chase, 84 catches for 1,780 yards and 20 touchdowns. Justin Jefferson that same year, 111 catches for 1,540 yards and 18 touchdowns. So, there's been some dudes.
Larry Fitzgerald's last year at Pitt was crazy. Michael Crabtree's numbers for 2 years at Texas Tech was just dumb, just absolutely dumb.
Yeah, there's been some dudes. I'm gonna have to disagree with that comment a little bit. Gonna have to disagree with that comment pretty strong. Go look at Amari Cooper's numbers his last year at Alabama.
He had 1,900 yards, didn't he, or some crazy?
It was 1,700, but he had 124 catches. Yeah, some nuts stuff. Absolutely nuts stuff.
Alabama's had some guys. They've had some
Yeah.
guys.
Yeah. And like, so the response could be, well, some of those offenses were like air raids. I'm like, that's fair, but Ohio State's kind of similar principle. Like, they're schematically they're different, but it's the same thing. And they throw a million passes. I mean, like, they throw the ball a ton. Antoine Johnson says, we talked about that one. Milton Fan 15 says, this is for Ryan. Can you explain the high favorability for Logan Diggs? I've seen him play and not seeing the ceiling at all, or what all the fuss is about.
Yeah, Milton, I think that we saw just glimpses of it last year. I think for what I'm projecting forward is that I think Logan Diggs has the best all-around skill set of the running backs, right? Like Chris Tyree's got the game-breaking speed, got the pass catching ability as well. Audric Estime's the physical downhill kid that has better feet than people give him credit for. I think Logan Diggs can kind of fit multiple roles in this offense. And it might not always be flashy, but I think when you're talking about what an offensive coordinator wants, like, you don't have to change anything you do for Logan Diggs. Like, if you're a gap power heavy scheme, cool. If you want to be a zone blocking scheme, cool. You want to run some outside zone, cool. You want to use him in the passing game, cool. I think Logan Diggs, just everything he does is very solid. So everything around, all around, I like the skill set overall of Logan Diggs.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Great feet, great balance, great vision, a lot of talent. That's almost say because he didn't ask me. Jack Lorenzo, what are your thoughts on Notre Dame's ability to make halftime adjustments? Is this an area that needs to improve going forward, and how would they do that? Honestly, like, we could spend a lot of time on this, Jack, but it really doesn't matter, because I think we're in a different situation. Even when you look at, well, they have the same OC. They have the same OC who still had some things dictated to him by the head football coach. And so, I think that's an area where I actually thought Tommy did a pretty good job making halftime adjustments last year. And as I've talked about the Oklahoma State game, I think in 2020, I thought Notre Dame did a pretty good job of making halftime adjustments. I think that they've been hampered at different times by the personnel just not being there at the same time. Good O-line in 2020, good running back, but maybe not the greatest quarterback, and the receiving core wasn't overly explosive. 2021, I think you had more dynamic players, but you had a quarterback that was a great decision maker, but couldn't make the plays with his legs that the previous quarterback could. And you had an offensive line that couldn't protect him. So I think there's always different issues. This year, there should be no excuses. I mean, we're going to find out who he is, but that's something I want to see. And honestly, the other thing that hurt Coach Reese was he didn't really have a staff that was top to bottom, had the kind of depth that this staff is going to have. You didn't have an O-line coach that you're necessarily going to listen to a whole lot, and the receivers coach who didn't bring much value. I think this one's going to be a little bit of a different deal, in my opinion. And I definitely think that there's going to be a greater trust with the offensive line coach for sure. Defensively, I have no clue, because the guy running the defense hasn't called a game since 2005. I couldn't possibly give you any type of thing. The only thing that I would ask you, Ryan, is did you watch enough of the Bengals in the last few years at least as the staff, to feel like he came from a staff to make adjustments? It's the only thing I could even say. And again, I don't watch enough football to really say that.
I mean, the game that people are going to point to is the playoff game against the Chiefs, where they completely they really confused that offense, Patrick Mahomes and company, in the second half. They gave up a few touchdowns in the second half. It's like, I think Mahomes had like no touchdowns, 2 interceptions or something like that. So that's the game they're going to point out. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that I watched enough Bengals games to give you like a proper educated assessment. I will just say that the Bengals definitely did have some really good moments down the stretch in the playoffs last year that leaves you to believe. I mean, even the Rams, this was like a quiet thing, but like the Super Bowl, the Rams came out of the second half and were not great out of halftime. Like the Bengals really jumped on them quickly, both offensively and defensively. And then the Rams had to kind of come back at the end a little bit. But I think the Bengals did have a lot of nice adjustments last year.
Last question is from Brian J. Irish. Brian and Ryan, we've been asked this before. Brian and Ryan, which do you prefer? I'll let you answer it. I'm going to answer one part of it, Ryan, and then let you kind of take the crux of it. Which do you prefer, receive or kick off for the second half? Does the opponent have a say on what you do? I rather kick off first. I never understood BK's way on this. So number one, yes, the opponent can have a say on what you do. If they win the coin toss, unless their team captain is an idiot, they're going to determine kind of what you do. And what I mean by this, there was I think it was a high school game I was at where they won the toss, and they say, "What did you choose to do?" And they said, I'm trying to remember how it went down, but basically the other team deferred and they chose to kick off, which meant the other team could then choose. Because what deferment means is it's not, okay, if you defer, the other team is going to make their choice, but that means that team gets to choose for the second half, right? So if they defer and you choose to kick off, that means the other team chooses to return in the second half, which means they return twice. Yeah. And so I was like, I don't think you. And so then it's funny because I'm walking back. They're like explaining to the head coach what happened, and he's like, "What are you doing?" You know. But that's to say, unless the team captain is an idiot, the other team determines. You know, if they defer to the second half, then obviously you're gonna make your choice. So, and so yes, if you lose the toss, the other team's gonna dictate what you do. Is the moral of the story. Ryan, what is your? I've said this. I don't care. It depends on team. I don't think there's a right or a wrong way. What's your stance on this? And this will be where we where we end it.
Yeah. So I'm, and this is my bias. Brian talked about his bias a little bit earlier. This is my bias. I'm a defensive guy. I'm always going to defer. It's just me. I'm okay with being on the field first, and I want to have the ball first out of halftime to kind of dictate the pace of the second half. That's just what I prefer. That's my bias. I'm a defensive guy. That's what I'm always going to do. Let's defer, take the ball, start the second half. That's my thing. Yeah. It's my jam. And
but see, here's the thing though. It's what you want to do. It's because how you would build your football team.
100%.
Right. 100%. And that's the reality of it. And my point is that I don't think your way is wrong. I'm an offensive guy. I want the ball. My point is simply, I just don't think it matters that much. It's just about what your strategy is and what your team is built around and all those kind of things. So that to me is the much bigger deal. So that is going to do it for today's show. Appreciate everybody's patience as we got that little hiccup in the middle, but as Ryan, of course, as I knew he would, just took it and rocked it. So we'll be back tomorrow. We're going to talk about the offensive line and a little bit more in depth about the tight ends tomorrow. 6:00 tonight, Sean and Vince are going to talk more about the potential TV deal, and they're going to have a fun little what would you do if you could go back in time and make a change at Notre Dame. They have a question about that, which is going to be a lot of fun. So that's tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern on the IB Nation Sports Nation show. So you're going to definitely want to tune into that, which means you need to, of course, Ryan, to know when that is, you need to obviously join the message board. Number one, hit the like button, everybody. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, share this podcast, leave a 5-star review. If you're listening via podcast, would appreciate that very, very much. Visit the IB store for the merch. And as always, go Irish. Everybody have a great rest of your day, and we will talk to you again very soon on the Irish Breakdown Podcast.